All right, we're gonna give people a few minutes. Come on in. Hey, how are you? How are things going for you? Hopefully well. Hopefully things are going all right. Things are going okay for myself. Just getting stuff ready. Go for our little stream here. So, gonna give people a few more minutes a couple of minutes to show up. Which is fine because I need to promote the stream. Anyways, we're gonna go do that, and then these off. Yeah, these are my blue light glasses. Wear them all the time. Right. Bing. Alright, that's done. That's done. Not open anymore. Let's get over here. There we go. So, get everybody up to speed. We did not have D&D yesterday. We'll have D&D tomorrow. But didn't have it yesterday, and didn't have it at all last week. So, I'm feeling the drought. I'm feeling the drought in that time. Now, in addition to that, I was speaking to a friend and fellow DM pretty recently about, well, exactly this. About building combat encounters and making them a little bit more difficult. He was struggling with the current party, trying to bring a little bit more challenging combats to them. And we talked about it, and as we talked about it, and I thought more about it, I was like, oh, well, I'll edit and we'll talk about it on stream. I was expecting you to, it'll be a short thing, and had some other topics planned. But then the further we went along with it, I very quickly realized, like, oh, right, this is a very deep topic. This is stuff that not a ton of people talk about all the time, so we're going to talk about that. So I'm going to take that other stuff that was also... Whoa. There we go. Little chair thing. One thing I do not like about the chair. Great chair. But the little rod that keeps the tilt function from going back is very short, so it actually comes unseated, not unregularly. It's always a fun surprise when it does just like that. You're sitting there and then what was I saying? This is a very deep topic. So obviously we're gonna get into it. We're gonna talk about it a lot more. Audio is still working good on my end, so you guys let me know if you have any audio problems. But I feel like I finally gotten to the point where I finally figured out some sort of fix, at least for my headphones, and being able to adjust the sound outside of OBS, which was nice. Because for a while there, I couldn't change the sound in my headphones, or else by changing the sound in the headphones, it changed the sound in the stream, which is not what I want. So obviously, now I've got that resolved, at least, or a workaround at least. So, yeah, let's see. Before we get into it, is there anything else that we need to... I'm gonna move over a little bit. There. Make us a little bit more center. It bugs me that you can see just the corner of my bookcase in the video, but that's all right. We're gonna move on from that. All right. So, let's talk about it. Go ahead and get into it. We don't need to get too far into it. We don't need to. People will catch up. The beginning part we're gonna talk about first is stuff people already know, anyways. So, getting whomped, not fun as a DM always. Sure, yeah. I mean, we want our players to win. Obviously, we want them to overcome the combat encounters. If they don't overcome the combat encounters, well, then the whole party dies. That kind of kills the campaign, or at least that adventure. And it's not very fruitful for ongoing play, unless you're playing a very specific type of game, in which you're playing a high lethality game, and the individual characters don't matter as much. But I think for most contemporary D&D players and DMs, we focus a lot more on that sort of narrative style play, which is the idea that you want to have a player character who's going to have their own sort of personal growth and arc and very woo-woo story stuff. Not in a bad way, just that is the style of play du jour at the moment. So, that does mean, how do you do combats? Because you also don't want to make combats that are too easy, but you also don't want to make them that are too hard. Because it's very easy to make, if you're just trying to kill player characters, that's very easy to do. If you want to do it by the books. You don't even need to do it by the books. There's the old adage. No, not an adage. No, just saying. Rocks fall, everybody dies. And the DM gets upset with the party, with the players at the table, most especially. They go, you know what? The ceiling collapses and you all die in this dungeon. We're going to do something else. So it's very, very easy to just hand wave and kill characters. Or, you know, if you want to feel like you're doing it by the books, you just pull out a Tarrasque and throw it at your third level party or whatever and be like, well, that thing killed you, so now the campaign's over and we're going to do something else. So, creating combat encounters that are absolutely lethal is very, very easy. But I think there's a big difference between lethality and difficulty. So, we want to talk a little bit about how do you make difficult encounters that aren't necessarily maybe super lethal encounters. And we come across a lot of dungeon masters, I feel like, especially in 5th edition, who are like, I don't know how to build encounters to challenge my players. And that's not unexpected. Let's put it that way. That's not unexpected because the 5e 2024 rules don't give you a lot of guidelines as to how to build an encounter. I think when we went back and looked through the DMG for the 2024, the combat building combat encounters section is so small. And as is a lot of things, especially in the 2024 book, Dungeon Master's Guide, it's like there's a lot of hints at really good advice, but then when it kind of comes down to brass tacks, kind of the practical applications of like, this is how you do it, the thing that some sort of, I don't know, guide for dungeon masters, that's where it always goes hands off. So it kind of gives you a bunch of good ideas and then was like, stand back and it's just kind of like, wait, you figure it out, I guess. Which is not necessarily helpful information for new dungeon masters or game masters trying to get into a system, is to have the thing that's supposed to be your guide not really guide you on how to do it, rather than giving you a baseline and then you are able to build off of that baseline. So it's not unexpected that a lot of dungeon masters struggle with coming up with difficult combat encounters that aren't... So most of their encounters either fall into, oh, that was way too easy and the players kind of came in and their characters steamrolled over everything, or they dial it in difficulty the other way and everybody dies. So trying to find that split balance in the middle is somewhat difficult. And I should say that I don't think it's particularly difficult. It's not like it's a complex thing. It's relatively easy. It's just that you have to have the knowledge of what things, all the settings and dials that are at your disposal as a dungeon master or game master to tweak to really dial in specifically the level of combat that you're trying to have. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. So I figured the easiest place to start would be with, let's talk about the opposition. So these are going to be these are going to be your monsters. These are going to be the creatures that focus up against you. Well, let me take a step back. Let me do that. Actually, I need to share my screen. Is what I need to do. And once I share my screen, then we'll all be on the same page. How about that? All right. Of course, if you guys have any questions, just go ahead and drop them in, and we'll address them as we're able to. Yeah, is that what I'm looking for? No. Where's the right window? There it is. Okay. Yeah, so we're all on the same page as what we're looking at. All right, so you're getting tired of these Steamrolled D&D encounters. Let's build a counter to Whomp party. That's what we're doing here. So we're not just going to build one encounter. We're going to basically take one encounter and we're going to put it through its paces. So what is our setup? Let's do a setup. And let's do... There you go. Alright, so let's say our combat encounter setup. So what's our combat encounter setup? So I think our combat encounter setup, I think I'll do bullet points. So I think I wanted to do something that's really generic. I don't want to do something that's too high level, but not too low level. Actually, dialing in combat difficulty actually becomes more and more difficult the lower the level is, because the player characters aren't as resilient. Higher level characters, they have access to a lot more stuff. Their ability to withstand a bunch of stuff, and both the damage they can dish out and the sort of pain and damage they can take in gives you a lot more flexibility. They're much more rubbery. Whereas at the very low levels, especially things like level 1s, level 2s, level 3s, their hit point pool is pretty crushing your head small. And the abilities that they have to change the battlefield are fewer and further between. Running out of spell slots, that's a common thing that happens, things of that nature. So, with that in mind, what is our combat setup? So I want to get something that's in the middle, so I think we're going to go 4th level party. I think we're just going to go standard composition. Just because we're doing an example. You can change up some of this stuff specifically based on the classes, but for now we'll just kind of do the classic core 4. We're going to have ourselves a fighter. We're going to have ourselves a cleric, a rogue, and a wizard. All the bases are covered. Everybody got everything they want. So we want a 4th level party. That's with that standard composition. Adventure, I'm thinking let's keep it as basic as possible, because I think that way we can really see the differences as we build them out. So let's do a cave system, dungeon, room. So yeah, standard, we're doing a dungeon delve. It's in a cave system. Perfect. And we'll just go this way. So it's going to be a dungeon room. So we don't have any specifics about the room, because that's one of the nice things that we'll talk about as a dungeon master, is that you can change the specifics of the room to have them build into your encounter setup. And what is our primary opposition? This is low level play, and I don't think there's any reason not to do goblins. Goblins are really good because they have monsters in the CR band that's allow you to fight them from 1st level up through like 6th level. So that first chunk of levels in D&D, that first, even beyond the first tier of combat. So in those bands of levels 1 through 4, definitely plenty of goblins. 5 through 10, a little bit of goblins, and then that starts to kind of peter out, because I think the highest goblinoid enemy is like a CR 6. And that's supposed to be like a warlord, I think. So, and I think, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's a warlord. Like a hobgoblin warlord. So that's as high as it goes. So obviously it would be kind of silly to build an encounter that was like 6 hobgoblin warlords, because they really need to be in charge of lower level things. So really those lower levels, like level 5, level 6, is where you're going to cap out on goblinoids. Alright, so we're going to talk about our opposition. Or, you know, that's a fancy word. We'll just say monsters. So our monster type is kind of goblinoid. So this is going to be a goblinoid complex dungeon. Like that's the primary antagonist or faction that's at play here. Alright, so that's our setup. Very, very simple. 4th level party, doing a dungeon delve. They're going to come up. They're going to come do their things. Perfect. Exactly what we needed. Exactly. So, let's move on from there. Hold on. Am I going? Not going. I'm going, right? There we go. Alright. Sorry, OBS was telling me some weird info there for a second. I think we're all good. I'm going to assume we're all good. Until I find out otherwise. But I think we're good. Did I do that? Okay. Back to the topic. All right, so that's sort of our setup. So let's talk about, I wanted to talk about the first things is the opposition. And this is the bread and butter, I feel like, where everybody, most dungeon masters, the start and stop for most dungeon masters. Okay, we have a combat encounter. Who are they going to encounter within this combat? The primary thing we're looking at there is we're talking about CR, or we'll do it this way. We'll do party level, CR, which is our challenge rating. We'll just go ahead and spell it out. And our, we can put this up here. Is there, yeah, we'll put it here. Adventure here. So we have that, and then we have basically odds. And these can sometimes be considered the same thing, though they're not necessarily always the same thing. And that's odds and action economy. And I think for most dungeon masters, this is where encounter planning, combat encounter planning begins, and this is also where it ends. This is the basically your end all be all. Oops, that's what I meant to do. Do that. There we go. All right, trying to give us a little bit more room. So, and this, again, we're going to use some tools, and we're going to look at some actual stuff. So let's say, okay, I have my party level, I know what I'm going to make. Let's jump over, we're going to use our first tool, which is my preferred encounter builder, but everybody has their own flavor. This is Kobold Club, or Kobold Plus Fight Club now. And we're going to go in here, we're going to go into our filters. We're going to do a creature type. Actually, we don't even need to do that. We can actually put it up here at the filter at the top. We'll put Goblinoids, because I'm pretty sure that's a tag in here. It sure is. There we go. We're going to arrange them by CR. Yeah, there we go. The Hobgoblin Warlord is a CR6. So again, we're very much things that are pretty much in that first tier of adventure, going over into that second tier of adventure, those 5 through 10 levels for a party. And then we said that we're going to do 4 players, so we've got that right, and we're going to do a 4th level adventure. So you might go, all right, for most Dungeon Masters, they might come in here and be like, all right, they're going to fight 1 Hobgoblin Devastator. Now, perfectly reasonable, you could throw that in there. That will be probably not a great encounter. That will probably be, we can do that, tell you why. We'll look at our Hobgoblin Devastator real quick. I'm going to open up another website called 5e Tools, just so we can see the stat block. There we go, Hobgoblin Devastator. Alright, so the Hobgoblin Devastator. Medium Fey Goblinoid, AC 13, only 45 hit points, so easy to hit, doesn't have a ton of hit points, not particularly fast, doesn't go early in the initiative, has a quarterstaff. This is definitely a spellcaster. So you want to put a sole spellcaster against a full party, knowing that basically the fighter's going to run up and knock them over. Depending on your cleric might do that. You might have 3 characters in melee. You could have technically all 4 characters in melee against this guy. Unlikely, but you could. So we'll see. So it basically has its quarterstaff attack, which is a +3 to hit, which is probably not going to do very well against a 4th level party. Devastating Bolt is +5 to hit. That's better. And has the ability to knock the target prone. Okay. Sure. But this does a bunch of damage. 48 plus 3. That's a lot of damage. That's a huge chunk of hit points. So it's going to hit, and it's going to hit hard, and it gets to make 2 of those, which means that we'll start to see the issue already with a lot of D&D encounter building, is that 2 hits will, from this Devastating Bolt, and it gets a multi-attack, so it gets to make it twice on its turn, is that basically when it's its turn, there is a not unlikely, it's not unlikely that this Devastator will just drop a character in one turn. From full hit points, all the way down. With that, as a 4th level character. If they're out here doing an average of 42 damage on a turn, they're going to knock somebody down. Unlikely they're going to kill somebody, but they could crit. Remember that this could be, instead of 42 damage, could be closer to like 80 damage. Or 78, something like that. Points of damage. Which could absolutely kill somebody. Like full out, permadeath, you're dead. You're done. So you have to be a little bit careful with that. Also, it's just spellcasting. Mage Hand, Prestidigitation, they have Fireball. That's going to be hard for a 4th level party to deal with. Fog Cloud, Gust of Wind, Lightning Bolt. Lightning Bolt and Fireball are both 8d6 damage, right? That's going to be tough for a 4th level party to deal with. And if you're in this cave, it's likely that you're going to be able to get Fireball. That's going to get at least half the party, if not more of them. And if you're playing this character, this bad guy smart, he might find a way to get himself into, or try to deal with them in a hallway, in which point he can hit them all with a lightning bolt, where they're all standing in a line. So, very, very powerful. This is a very classic D&D monster issue, very glass cannon, extremely powerful. Likelihood is that they're going to be whomped in the second round, by the second round. They're probably only going to get one turn in combat when they have an AC that's that bad, and they don't have enough hit points. So, again, this is why you can't just trust it right out the box. So, obviously, that's a big problem. But unless you're a DM who understands some of those things and are looking for that sort of information, you go, oh, well, that's what the encounter builder spit out, so that's what I'm going to use. So, we'll go ahead and add it in here. Oop, that was the wrong thing. This is another document. This is actually something that used to be in my DM's binder. We're going to talk about most of this stuff, so we don't really need to pay attention to it. I just brought it up just to make sure I don't forget anything while we're talking about it. So, what we're going to end up with is, do it this way. So, we had our party level, we got that in, we got the challenge rating right. Even though the challenge rating, what's the Devastator's a 4 though, right? It's a CR4. CR4, yeah. I hate that the CR is like way down here in the stat block. Why is it not on the line with the title? That's my issue with D&D's current stat blocks. So yeah, and I mean, even for a solo encounter, that's not enough. And we'll see on here, it even tells you like this is a low difficulty encounter. But what if we added 2 of these guys? That becomes a high level. Then it becomes significantly more lethal. Because of the amount of damage that these guys can pump out. So 1. So, say they give us 1. Dater. Is that right? Yes. So here's the thing: is that we know that that's not an appropriate CR monster. You can't use a 4th level 4 CR monster for a 4th level party. I know the math, the way CR is set up, should tell you that is appropriate, but we also know that that's not how that works. I'm grabbing my Dungeon Master binder, because one of the things I do have in here is from the Xanathar's Guide to Everything, is there's a quick matchups table, and I have that in here when I really, really need to pull something out of my butt fast. And it tells you, okay, you can have 1 of these per PC, 2 of these per PC, and 4 of these per PC. So a 4th level party doesn't really tell us any solos, but it should be saying that we should be basically fighting 4 CR1 creatures, which is not the same as fighting 1 CR4 creature. There's also a table for solo monsters in there. I don't typically use solo monsters because I think no matter what monster you have, you're going to end up with these same problems that we have with this one Hobgoblin Devastator. You're going to end up with that same problem. So that's why I actually avoid doing most solo encounters. Or if you're going to do it, you really do have to give them legendary actions, legendary resistances. They need to have layer stuff going on. Which means that you're going to have to do a lot of work to make that right for the Hobgoblin Devastator. And that doesn't really make sense if the Hobgoblin Devastator is not the big bad of this cave system, this adventure. Which I don't think is not what we set up. We said that this is a cave system and dungeon room. That this was not like the ultimate or even penultimate encounter of this dungeon. This is just an encounter in a dungeon. So I don't think that we can say that this would be the big bad guy, so there's no reason we would give them something like layer actions or legendary resistances, those sorts of things. So we're not going to do that. But this is sort of the issue, is that, alright, now, that's something that an absolutely neophyte Dungeon Master might do. They might come there and be like, oh, one Hobgoblin Devastator, perfect. And then they'll run their combat and be like, man, they really whomped that guy. What did I do wrong? And then as we learn about it, one of the first things you come across would be like, oh, well, the secret to understanding D&D combat is odds / action economy. Odds is the number of good guys versus the number of bad guys, which in generally 5e math really wants you to keep relatively equal to each other. 4 PCs, you really should be fighting about 4 bad guys. What you really don't want to do is you don't want to have double of them, and you don't want to have half of them. So that means that you really want to keep your range between like 3 and 7 monsters most of the time. If you stay within that, try to keep 3 to 7 monsters on the field for a 4 PC party, you're generally going to come out alright. And that's what we're going to have in here. So we're going to put that in there. We'll just put it, somewhere between. And we'll just put it here. 3 to 7 monsters for a 4th level party. Not correct. So yeah, that's what we want to do. We want to keep it in there. That's a really good rule of thumb. So you really want to keep it in about there. Now, obviously, if you're trying to build a solo encounter, that's going to be different. But there's also things you can do, like have ads and minions and things like that. Other challenges that come in that kind of fill out the stage, if you will. Really kind of fill out the setting. Even if they are primarily just nuisances or beat a bit set dressing. Or they're like one-trick ponies. You have them in there for a very, very specific reason. Like a good example of that would be like, there are some monsters in D&D, both third-party, homebrew, and official, that do things like explode when they get hit. So if you wanted to throw that in with an encounter with, say, something like a dragon who's got a breath weapon. So it has a likelihood where they're going to be okay hitting the little mooks that are also peppered in with the PCs, because they're going to hit them, then those guys are going to explode on the PCs. And I'm already getting into more complicated encounter building, which we're going to get to. But so let me not get fully ahead of myself. And I feel like right there I was just about to push you into the deep end of the pool when you're still got your water wings on. So we're not going to do that quite yet. But those are the sort of things, like, that's where my mind goes. That's why I typically don't have any difficulty being like, oh, I need to make difficult encounters for my PCs. I'm like, how do I turn off that part of my brain usually, or like choke it down a little bit? Because oftentimes I will make really, really difficult combat encounters. Just because I find it fun. So we have our odds in our action economy. So let's go back. All right, so we were like, okay, this one, our neophyte GM went back to the drawing board. They went, all right, well, I did the one monster, so that's obviously not enough. All these people keep talking about action economy, so action economy must be a thing. All right, so let's try something else. All right, so we know we've got this 4th level part. This is where D&D math changed in 2024. And so this encounter builder changed. So those quick matches don't quite do it. Because here they're saying this is a low CR, but would be 6 CR1 encounters. Which is still within the realm of what we would consider reasonable. We can even buff it up a little bit. But let's try something that's not a goblin. No, we can use this. We'll just use this out of the box as it is, because then we'll talk about why it's maybe not a great one. Okay, so our second thing is going to give us 6. We're like, all right, perfect. So we're going to have 5 goblin bosses, One Nilbog. I do know the Nilbog is a caster as well. So this is actually not terrible design, because you have the goblin bosses that have some martial, or primarily martial, and one caster, so you have already got a mix of things that are going on. Let's look at goblin boss. Alright, so they have multi-attack. They get 2 attacks. They have much more reasonable damage with their normal slashing damage. Plus they get to do a little extra damage if they have advantage. So when you're throwing a bunch of guys on the tarmac there for the fight, when you're outnumbering the party, you're going to get a lot of advantage. Assuming you're using the alternate like flanking rules. If you're not using flanking rules where you don't get advantage from having those sorts of creatures, you're having another party member next to them, another monster next to them, this will be lessened significantly. You will not be getting a lot of these. Now the way to mitigate that, if you're not doing that, is to make sure that these guys, at least one of their attacks, are going to attempt to like push somebody down. Now they don't have very good strength, so that means that you don't go for the fighter. You can try to push the rogue down. You can try to push the wizard down, maybe even the cleric down if they're playing more of a magic caster cleric and not like a cleric that swings their weapon a bunch, that wades into melee. You can do that. You can have them sit in the back too, because they also have bows, so that gives them a good ability to do melee and range with the same, essentially the exact same. They're basically no different whether they're fighting in melee or in ranged. They also have this thing, which is something that won't come up very often. Redirect attack. The creature the goblin can see makes an attack roll against it. The goblin chooses a small or medium ally within 5 feet of itself. The goblin and that ally swap places, and the ally becomes the target of the attack instead. So this is really good because goblin bosses can like swap around which one gets hit, which means that you can keep them on the battlefield longer. So if it's an attack that would kill one of them, you can swap it out with one of the ones where they can take all that damage and not go down. Which means that there's going to be potentially another round with another guy up who gets to make 2 more attacks. So this works out really well. Then we also have the Nilbog. Nilbogs can be kind of nasty. We'll just pull them up side by side. So the Nilbog, lots of stealth, so they're a stealthy kind of creature. Any creature that attempts to damage the Nilbog must first succeed on the DC 12 Charisma saving throw or be charmed until the end of the creature's next turn. Okay. So, if you've never played with a Nilbog before, they can be really pain in the butt enemies for players. Because most player characters do not have very good charisma saving throws. Most. So obviously your sorcerers, your warlocks, your bards, they're pretty good at it, but not really anybody else. I mean, paladins are okay at it because I believe they get charisma as one of their saves. So even if they have nothing in the charisma, they're still only going to need to roll a 10. So they're going to be okay. But your fighters, your barbarians, your wizards, they're not going to be very good at these saves. And they'll end up being charmed. Now, the other thing that the Nilbog has going for it is that it can heal itself. Reversal of Fortune. In response to another creature dealing damage to the Nilbog reduces the damage to 0 and regains 1d6 hit points. This is really bad for big, nasty attackers. And it's another creature dealing damage to the Nilbog, so it doesn't even have to be an attack. So if your wizard pops out Burning Hands and shoots off Burning Hands, you can be like, oh, I could take all that damage, but actually, I'm going to take no damage and get 3 hit points back instead. They're very annoying creatures to fight, is what I'm trying to get at, is because then the player loses their spell slot, they're not going to be happy about that. But if you want to make stuff that whomps characters, Nilbogs are real good at it. They have a melee attack. They do psychic damage, which means they can get around things like Barbarian Rage, which is really useful. They can cast one of the following spells with Charisma. Tasha's Hideous Laughter, which is always a fun one. And of course, all goblins have Nimble Escape, which gives them the ability to disengage or hide as a bonus action. Which is extremely useful. It means they can run around a whole bunch. So they're really hard to tie down. So, Is this better encounter? Yeah, this is probably going to be a really annoying encounter, though. The goblin boss ability is great, but anytime you come across something that's got boss in the name, or warlord, or chief, or something like that, they need to have mooks with them. Usually they have some sort of power that works off their mooks, or empowers their mooks. Like the goblin boss has the ability to swap out an enemy with itself. So this is really good if you had a whole field of a whole bunch of little, just basic CR 1/4 goblins. And, you know, the paladin comes up and it's like, oh, I crit and I do my 2nd level smite and you're going to take 56 damage. And the goblin boss is like, actually, you hit this guy who's only got 10 hit points and you wasted a whole bunch of stuff. It's a nasty surprise. This will be a very nasty combat if you play them tactically sound. If you don't, it's going to run just like any other, like you're running any other type of goblin. They'll stand there, they'll exchange blows, they'll go down. Maybe you'll use the swap thing maybe once, maybe twice. But yeah, if you just have them get in there and stick, it'll be a very, very boring combat. Uh-oh. What? Oh, it's just saying, YouTube is not receiving enough video to maintain smooth streaming. As such, you have to open the widget. Oh no! Viewers will experience buffering. No, not the buffering. It is not the buffering. Think of the children. That's alright. Well, there's nothing I can really do about that, so we're gonna keep moving on. So, yeah, the thing is that this is generally where most dungeon masters or game masters kind of stop. They're like, okay, I know to put down an appropriate number of monsters that have an appropriate number of attacks. Now, the other thing is that this action economy is still super wonky. Let's go back to that. So these guys have multi-attack. This is why odds and action economy are not the same, but they can be misconstrued as the same thing. The goblins bosses all have multi-attack, which means that they get to make 2 attacks per. So, if we look at that very quickly, now Nilbog's only got 1 because he's a caster. Nilbog. So you've got 4 party members. They're 4th level, so they don't have their upgraded cantrips yet, and they don't have multi-attack yet. They don't have the ability to do multiple attacks on one turn. They still have action surge and stuff like that, where they can get more attacks out. They have bonus action attacks, that sort of stuff. So they do have options. There are a lot of ways that they can attack more than once, but not fundamentally. Those are generally special powers that they're tapping into, not like baseline stuff. So you have basically 4 characters that can make 4 attacks in a full round of combat. They're going to make generally, yeah, I know the bonus attacks, blah 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 blah. Yeah. But we're going to go by the absolute basics because we don't know who's playing what type of character and how tactically they play and all that stuff. So 4 attacks. We're just going with baseline. You got your fighter, your rogue, your wizard, and your cleric. We're going to make 4 actions, 4 attacks. Now, the goblin bosses, there's 5 of them. And they make 2 attacks each. That's 10. And you have the Nilbog, so 11. They actually get 11 times that. So they're doing almost 3 times more actions in that same round of combat. And they have the ability to pass around the damage, so the likelihood that they're going to go down is not as much. So this is one where you look at it and you'd be like, okay, this could actually probably, if you played them tactically sound, you can take down PCs like this. You could kill maybe all the PCs with this encounter. If you're, especially with the, what's it called? The Nimble Escape. Allowing them not to get locked down so that way all your goblin bosses can stay next to each other. But also maybe avoid any AoEs. So it gives them that ability to do that kind of thing. Which is, so if you play them right, yeah, this is going to be a really tough encounter. Most Dungeon Masters don't take a lot of the tactics or strategy into consideration. That's one of the reasons why the books, the monsters know what they're doing, have been so successful. Even though really all that guy is doing in most of the times, I can't remember the author's name at this point, but one of the primary thing that he's doing at this point is basically looking at the stat block and just writing out the tactics based off of the stat block. and like what monsters they would work well with. That's all stuff that you could just read the stat block and kind of figure out. We already looked at that, right? That's the entire thing that we did here. We looked at the goblin bosses and be like, oh, well, they're going to have this ability to swap out with each other. And the Nilbog's going to be able to protect themselves so they can take those big hits and brush them off. The goblin bosses will have the ability to kind of spread out their damage. Even though we did talk about, and one of the things that would be, I assume it's in that book, is that the goblin bosses work really well when they have a bunch of like 1/4 goblin minions with them that they can swap out to avoid things like crits and stay in the fight longer. But this is where most people kind of stop. So we're going to put this here. Let's make it break. This is where we're going to say most. We'll say most dungeon masters stop. And baby, that's where we're starting. That's not where we're stopping. That's where we're starting. Where you should start to be planning your encounters, not the end goal of it. I was gonna do. Let's do it this way. Where is it? That's paragraph styles, alignments. We'll put that in the center. There we go. We'll go ahead and we'll give it a little bold. Why not? Take bold off of it and go back to left aligned. Just to keep it simple. Alignment left. There we go. All right. So, party level, challenge ranging, odds and action economy, and then we get a lot of dungeon masters that are still like, I'm still struggling with this, and we can see how that can happen because yeah, you just had a very competent 5 goblin bosses and 1 Nilbog. That does have the potential, if you're doing things in a very specific way, can have the opportunity to really wipe a party, depending on your party's composition, how tactical your players are, what kind of spells they have, all that good stuff, what kind of subclasses they took for their different player classes, or any of them multi-class. What do they have opportunity? What can they, address? We don't know that. We kind of have to go off of this. So the likelihood is that that's still probably, in general, not going to have really great, because if you just have 6 enemies, but you don't really treat them as being different, then you're essentially just throwing 6 goblins at the party, which they're going to be able to take out pretty easy. All right, so that's where everything stops. So let's talk about the next ones. Let's talk about, we can talk about readiness, sure. Can we talk about readiness? No, let's talk about, because we already touched on it a little bit. Tactics and strategy. Let's do that. So, tactics and strategy. This is where we're getting into it. This is where we start talking about things like, hey, those goblin bosses need to be swapping stuff around. You look at... You need to review... Stat block. Powers. And we'll say abilities. For abilities... Actions, and we'll say traits. So to use, you also want to look for synergy. Other monsters and environment. This is actually really important because most combat encounters that the players run into in D&D, the monsters almost, I was going to say almost always, but yeah, we'll say 80% of the time have home field advantage. Because usually it is the player characters who are attacking into a dungeon, into some sort of holdfast situation, their base of some type. So they already have home field advantage, which means that they know everything that's going on. They know the layout of everything. They know, and they should have things that are countermeasures for things like intruders that they can tap into as monsters very easily. So, let's talk a little bit about that. Let's talk about the stat blocks. So we did that. We're gonna do that. Let's talk about we did a lot of that already, but we can go back in and look at it just a bit. All right, so Goblin Boss, stealth. They have stealth as a skill. This Nilbog, guess what? They have stealth as a skill. So that should just straight up tell you immediately how they're going to engage with the enemies. These are not characters, if they both have high stealth, these are not monsters that are going to stand up toe to toe and swap swings. That shouldn't be how they're fighting. They should be doing sort of like hidden run tactics. They have, when you have this, and we have the nimble escape down here, this ability to disengage or hide. And you know what, as a dungeon master, I might cheat a little bit and also give them the full cunning action and be like, they can also dash as a bonus action. Just give them the ability to be like, you guys are going through the dungeon. Maybe they stumble across them, maybe these guys don't get the ambush on them. Likely they would, especially if my players are... If I was running and my player characters were making a whole bunch of noise as they were going through the dungeon, really not trying to be stealthy at all, they're going to hear them, they're going to wait, they're going to lay an ambush for them. They come in, they pop up, they use their short bows, they fire off these short bows. Bam, bam, bam. They're going to have advantage because they're stealth, so they're going to do that sort of alpha strike first round. They're going to pepper people with things, and then the Nilbog's going to have their thing, which might be its mocking word, might be what it is. Probably what they're going to do. Or they could hit somebody with Tasha's Hideous Laughter. Tasha's Hideous Laughter would be really good in this situation. Because it depends, it would depend on what happens. So if I was running this and the Goblin Bosses all, let's say most of them hit, they did a whole bunch of damage just right out the gate. They got the advantage, so they got the extra little D4 on it. They hit a bunch of the player characters that weren't prepared for it. Now we're going into the first real round of combat. So we're going to the first real round of combat. And my Nilbog's up and they have the ability to do something. I'll be like, okay, I could hit somebody and give them disadvantage on their next attack roll, so I might choose whoever I think is the most... Now, assuming this is my party of players, I know who's probably going to be dishing out the most damage, because I've probably been running for them for a while, for these characters. Assuming this isn't the first time you've met these characters. It's not a one-shot or something like that. Like, okay, well, I know that fighter has their superiority dice, and I know they're going to come in and absolutely wreck shop on whatever they hit in that first round, and they're motivated to do it because it just took a whole bunch of damage. So I'm going to hit that guy with the disadvantage on his attack from the first round. And so, with that in mind, I'll be like, these guys might stay for the next round of combat. They might hold their line. The Goblin Bosses are all going to circle up. They're going to try to be somewhat together. Make sure that at least... They should always be touching at least one other one so they can use their little swap feature. So you don't want them off by themselves for the most part. Unless you're going to sit one in the back who's just only going to fire off short bows. Which is perfectly good too. They could hide and shoot off short bows. Because remember, they have that bonus hide action, which will automatically give them the advantage. So they could do that too. They could also swap with the Nilbog. So you could do a very cool thing where you have the Goblin Archer in the back, that Goblin Boss who pops up, shoots off two, the Wizard turns around and well, hold on, let's look at the very specifics of that. They have to make an attack roll against it for the redirect attack. That's fine. Our Wizard turns around and shoots off a firebolt. Let's say that. Or, not even that, the other... throws 3 bolts. I can't think of what it's called, the spell name. So we'll just say Firebolt. I was going to say it was going to be like a real spell. Scorching Ray. There we go. Scorching Ray. Which I believe is an attack roll. I might have that wrong. But going to shoot it off at that guy, and that guy's like, ooh, can't take those Scorching Rays. So I'm going to use my reaction, and I'm going to swap with the Nilbog. The Nilbog's like, whoa, 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 don't push me in front. And then they're going to use their reaction to redirect... So they got the attack redirected to them from the Goblin, and then they're going to use their reaction to Reversal of Fortune and be like, I'm actually not going to take any damage. Instead, I'm going to get 1d6 hit points back instead. And that will really screw with, especially if it's a leveled spell. It's a really great way to screw with them. So you want to make sure that those goblin bosses are never off by themselves. They always want to be standing next to somebody. If we wanted to make this a really, really nasty fight, we double them up. We double up a goblin boss. Each goblin boss would have a nilbog with it. Just because that would make this much more of a nightmare fight. So if I was trying to make a nightmare fight, this fight will also just take a long time because it's hard to damage these guys. Because they're able to zero out a bunch of damage. Which is, if you've never fought a nilbog, this is very much a nilbog thing. If you've never fought a nilbog as a player, they are a pain in the butt to fight. They are just straightforward a pain in the butt. There's, I think it is one of the old Jenny D videos where she's talking about doing solo D&D, in which she and her compatriot fight a nilbog, and they're like, that combat takes them a very, very long time, and they talk about how frustrating it is in the combat because the nilbog has the ability, number one, you have to make a save to hit them, to even target them with the attack to begin with. And then once you do that, they have a reaction where they actually just be like, I'm not going to take the damage. And in addition to that, I'm going to get some hit points back. So they're very, very, they don't have a lot of hit points, but when they can negate damage, it seems like they have a ton of hit points. They functionally have a lot of hit points. But you also want to make sure that you're saving that for a big hit, too. You don't want to use it on a little piddly hit. So you want to take a little damage, but you don't want to use your reaction so that way you end up taking a crit and then immediately dying. But the thing I was getting to is in stealth. So let's say that maybe we didn't do so great in that surprise round. And the short bows, we missed a lot. I rolled really low on the dice. Goblins didn't get a lot. Bosses didn't. Not a lot of people got peppered with arrows. Like, first round of combat, what we're doing that nimble escape. We're gonna book it. We're gonna get out of here. This is definitely an encounter where you have everybody all the monsters in the encounter have pretty good stealth checks that they want to consistently be running away and hiding. This is the sort of encounter where you really don't ever want to stick up toe to toe and swap blows. They're not going to do a very good job with that. They want to run, they want to hide, they want to swap with other monsters, they want to circle back around, they want to deal with things like taking away the character's light, stuff like that. And so that starts to give you an ability of how these creatures synergize together. Which is actually exactly what we're talking about. So that's synergy with other monsters, right? We have our monsters in there. Now, other things we could do is if we wanted to swap out things with this thing, we could do, okay, let's take out Goblinoid. We like this. Again, this is still supposed to be a low difficulty fight. And this is a fight even at a low difficulty because they changed the CR math for 2024. And actually, you can put more monsters on the field because they thought that was the appropriate way to deal with Dungeon Masters talking about how they can't challenge players, which ended up with me, personally, not knowing the math had changed and then absolutely whomping some players that I was not expecting to whomp with an encounter. Because I did the math and I was like, this should not have been a difficult fight. They fought 3 monsters, and I've told that story already. That's the most lethal combat that I've had in this campaign that I've been running so far, which is 3 Dark Mantles versus the party. A party of 5? How many guys are we? No, maybe just 4. Yeah. Cleric, Artificer, Fighter, Rogue. I think it's just the 4. 5th player wasn't there. 4th, and then they had an NPC with them. But one of the things we can do is we can look for other allies. So at first we only talked about Goblinoids, but you can also include pets and allies with that. So one ally, a very classic ally that kind of comes with these, is Ogre. Ogre was always a good one. This is very, very reminiscent of the scene in Lord of the Rings and the Fellowship. You know, they go down in the tunnels, and what do you know? They've got a cave troll in there, sort of thing. It's very much like the cave troll encounter. Works exactly like that. We've got an ogre. We could add an ogre in here, and that would still make us moderate. This is great if we wanted to add an ogre in, because an ogre, I'm pretty sure, has a whole bunch of hit points. Unless I'm wrong. Yeah, well, actually, maybe they don't. Oh, they got 68 hit points. That's quite a bit of hit points. So now, if we wanted to make this really tough, we'll drop this down. We drop that down, maybe. Because 7 might be too high. Yeah, I mean, we could do 7. But if we added this ogre into the encounter, primarily just for its hit points. Here's the thing about players when you play with them. If you put something big on the battlefield like an ogre, something that's larger than medium size, they're going to assume that that is the big threat. Now, the strategy here is that you should know that the ogre, especially if you've been running D&D for 5e 2024 for any amount of time, you know that an ogre is actually an incredibly underpowered monster for its CR. It doesn't hit very hard. It doesn't hit very often. It's got very low to hit. Its damage is okay, and it's very easy to hit. The thing that's different about it is that it has a lot of hit points. So, do we have any monsters in our repertoire here who could make use of that? Well, these guys certainly can. The Goblin Boss. What's their primary ability again? Redirect attack. Makes an attack roll against it as a response. Chooses a small or medium. Oh, never mind. They can't choose the ogre because the ogre's too big. I might disregard that just for fun's sake, but that's probably why it's not in there. They probably realize that that is too powerful. Is that if you had all the Goblin Bosses stand at like points around the ogre and they could all transfer damage to the ogre instead? I guess this idea, and I'm not sure whether this is a mechanic choice or a thematic choice when they do the redirect attack, where it's a small or medium ally. Because I'm thinking it may be more of a thematic choice, because they were like, oh, the idea is that the fiction is that they grab another creature and pull them in front of them, which they wouldn't be able to do with a big ogre. So it actually may be more of a thematic choice than a mechanical choice. And so if that's the case, then I might just ignore the smaller medium ally and be like, no, they can absolutely use the ogre. Now this, again, makes things much more difficult. Other things they could have with them, they could have some wargs. They could have some wargs in there, so if we wanted to take out the ogre and be like, oh, well, that's some wargs. Maybe if I wanted to do that, maybe I would, I'd probably drop these guys again. And I could make it two Goblin Bosses, 1 Nilbog. That's still pretty good. And then I would add wargs in. We might have to add more than that, because that's telling me it's a trivial encounter. We don't want a trivial encounter. So maybe we'll do 3 and 1. That's still a pretty low encounter. Now this is going to bump up, and we're going to have more people. We're going to have a 2 versus 1 odds. We're still going to have lots as far as how many attacks we're putting on the board. So right, we have 3 Goblin Bosses, so that's 6 attacks, 7 from the Nilbog. I think the wargs only get 1. I think. Let's double check. Yeah, they only get 1 attack. All right. So if we're looking action economy wise, well, that's 4, 10, 11. So they're going to get 11. So exactly where we were. So functionally hasn't moved from that point. We did choose different targets and have more characters on the field. So I'm going to have all these goblins. Now these goblins can be riding the wargs, which is cool. That immediately gives them, the Goblin Bosses, the ability to swap out damage with a creature. They're always going to be next to one if they're mounted. The wargs I don't think have a ton of hit points though, do they? 26. Not great. This is how it would work out really well, though, if we want to talk about that synergy. So their bite, because they're a bite, attack because they're basically big wolves. So they're going to do a d8 piercing damage, and the next attack roll made against the target before the start of the warg's turn has, say it with me, advantage. Hey, the goblin bosses do more damage when they have advantage. So if you mix them with a creature that gives other creatures advantage, it's going to be really nasty. Now, we would lose the stealth element, because they're not very stealthy. The wargs are not stealthy at all. But if we wanted to change that, the sort of fiction, instead of being like, oh, there are creatures laying in ambush, if they hear the people coming, maybe they're charging towards the player characters riding these wolves down into the cave, which could be a really cool, different kind of scene. So they know they're coming too. And the nice thing is that because they all have ranged attacks, it means as soon as they get into the room, they can fire all the way across the room and start hitting people in the first round of combat. When those things like the fighters and the rogues might need to close, Potentially the cleric as well. The wizard should be fine. Presumably they have firebolt or something like that where they have 120 range, so they should be just fine hitting anybody anywhere. Or if you're playing a rogue who uses a bow, they'll be fine too. And the cleric could probably have some zappy ones, so I don't think most clerics have anything that's... I think max range like 60. I think. For the most part. So, that already puts us in a really, really nasty one. So, again, synergy with other monsters. So, like we said, it's a golemoid dungeon. That's the dungeon we're setting up. I knew that was that. But that doesn't mean you can only use goblinoids. That's another thing that's really important to remember. That they can have pets and allies too. They can be like, oh, well, we've allied with this ogre, so we have an ogre with us. Or a troll, or maybe they have some sort of, they could have an owlbear with them. I mean, that's kind of a higher CR. But the ability is like they have ways to get other things. They might have carrion crawlers with them under their control or something like that. Especially maybe something like the Nilbog. You can talk about how the Nilbog has that charm ability, right? They have charmed some other creatures. Maybe the creatures can turn against them in combat if you wanted to make... If things start going really bad for the PCs, that gives you kind of like a release valve to be like, oh, things are going really bad for them. They start breaking out of their charm state, and they can also become neutral parties or aggressive to both sides, both the goblins and the player characters, or maybe they just run away, or they could side with the player characters. You have a lot of different options if you want to do something like that. That could be a very cool, very thematic, fictional kind of fight. But yeah, so we didn't talk about environment. So this is one of the things where the stealth would really come in. So you want to make sure if you've got a bunch of characters, if we were using that baseline encounter with just the Nilbog and just the goblin bosses, to have the ability to be like, there's got to be stuff to hide behind. You've got to give them places to hide so that way they can use that stuff. Because really what you want to do, and this is probably just the baseline, like one takeaway if you want better combats, is to try to create combats where it's not everybody just runs at each other like movie style. The player characters and the monsters run at each other, they hit each other, and then they just stand there until one of the sides is gone. Because those can be really boring combats. So you want people who are moving around, people who are not trying to get into melee, people like the Nilbog, who's a caster, who's trying to get away, and then maybe trying to drag off, trying to get the player characters to separate and go in different directions. That's always good. Try to keep them from doing things like focusing fire on one specific monster, so that way they can spread out damage. If you spread out damage across all your monsters, they stay up longer, they're more of a threat. Very classic kind of stuff as far as getting into the tactics and strategy. So we talked about abilities, we talked about their actions, we talked about their traits to use. Is there anything else we haven't talked about? So nice thing is, that is one thing we haven't talked about. So because one of the nice things is in using humanoids for this example is that they have gear, they use gear. Which means that these are all dials you can change. The Goblin boss has chain shirt, a scimitar, a shield, and a short bow. You can kit them out with whatever you want. Now, is it going to be weird if there's 5 Goblin bosses with plate armor? Yeah, kinda. But it's already a little weird that there's 5 Goblin bosses with chain shirts. But you can do that. You can take away their shield if you want to. If you want to give them big mauls instead, they could have mauls instead. I mean, I don't know why you would do that. They really, really need decks. But you could decide if you wanted to get rid of this shield. You could lower their AC from 17 to 15, which makes them a little bit easier to hit. And you could change it out so that way they have maybe an offhand weapon attack too. So now you can go multi-attack where they do 2 scimitar, they do scimitar, scimitar, dagger. Which will really make them... And I would assume because they get the extra slashing damage, regardless of what weapon they're using, that they would also get that on their offhand weapon. So if I really wanted to pump up damage, I could do that. Really make this really lethal really quickly. And just in the same way you don't want your players to focus fire, the PCs to focus fire on any monster, you can focus fire with your monsters and be like, yeah, these 3 guys use their nimble escape to disengage, so that way they're able to run in, and then they all focus on the wizard really quick for this one round. They run in, and 4 guys come in and try to stab him and take him down, and then run back away. That's a perfectly useful kind of tactic to do, that sort of hit and run tactic. And now now the cleric's got to deal with the wizard who's down on the ground. So now the cleric and the wizard are out for a round because they're focusing on that. Which means now for this next round, you really only need to focus on the fighter and the rogue. And figure out which one's more difficult to hit, which one you can really drop in. They're probably close to each other. So, because that rogue's probably hanging around the fighter to make sure that they can get their sneak attack in with their backstab. So, you start building that stuff out in your head and you go, okay, I kind of understand probably what's going to happen in this encounter. I look at my players and their characters' specific tendencies. What do they do? How do they generally fight? Oh, well, I know that my fighter, like I'm thinking about my current campaign right now. I know my fighter is usually a 2-handed fighter, so they're actually pretty easy to hit because they don't have a shield and they don't have heavier armor on because they want to be stealthy still. So they're actually pretty easy to hit, for a fighter anyways. Pretty easy to hit because they're a strength-based fighter, but they're wearing lighter armor. They're pretty easy to hit, but they hit pretty hard. So that might be one of the things where I'll be like, oh, they're all going to descend on the fighter really quick and swarm over the fighter and attack them. I have an artificer who doesn't have a ton of attack spells. Likes to sit back and pew-pew with firebolt. So one of the things I might do would be like, okay, we're definitely going to have maybe the Nilbog go deal with them. Because they're going to get... they are already not super great in combat. Most of that character's geared towards out of combat stuff. I could run in and have the Nilbog deal with them, and then that's actually lessens the Nilbog's ability a whole bunch, because the artificers are only going to hit them some of the time, and they're going to negate that damage, which is only a D10, which is not a ton. Let's see, other people in my party. The rogue is... I generally don't have to do this because actually my current roster of players, their party is not super tactically sound, so the rogue actually generally isn't spending a bunch of time like flanking to get combat advantage in that way and get their backstab in that way, which means that they do a bunch of hiding. Which means if I have some characters that can stay on top of him, if I throw 2 goblin bosses on top of him, on top of that rogue, just to keep them kind of locked down so they're never able to run away and hide very well. That's one way to do that. And then our cleric's kind of a mix. They've got a mace. They use their mace sometimes. They also cast spells. So, but not super combat tuned. None of my party is right now. So probably can lock them down with only one, or might just ignore them, honestly, until they prove to be a hindrance. Especially if they're out of spells or they're saving most of their spells to do healing, rather than prevent the damage. Which is perhaps a player faux pas. That's up to you to decide. But yeah, so that's everything you kind of need to know about the opposition, the setting up the opposition. So even just by adding this one, or actually that's not it at all, sorry, my bad. That's it for tactics and strategy. So that gives you, even just adding that next layer on top of what is where most Dungeon Masters stop, is going to give you a lot of juice to work off of. Absolute ton of juice. So on top of that, we talked about tactics and strategy. We're going to talk about readiness and morale. I'm going to put them both in here, actually. All right, so what is readiness? So readiness we kind of talked about already. How prepared are they to fight? This is a very nice dial that you can change with, especially with humanoid characters that use gear. So if you wanted to make a readiness dial, be like... I think the easiest thing to do is look at my other sheet here. So here's the readiness column over here. So ambushed, PC unaware, they're on equal footing. The monsters are unaware, or the monsters are ambushed. And this is a very easy way to set things up. So ambush, fear, and positioning. I guess I should say open positioning. We'll say battle start positioning, I guess. So the things you can kind of keep intact too as far as their readiness. Okay, so we talked about then with their high stealth, assuming that our player characters are probably not doing their job of being stealthy, because I feel like most player groups that has been my experience running for generally don't spend that much time focusing on their own stealth when they're doing things like a dungeon crawl. Individual players and their player characters, yes. The group overall, generally not. Generally, you have the person who's the paladin or the fighter who's in heavy armor is just like, I'm just loud. And they never even really attempt to do a stealth, often. They're like, I'm just going to be loud wherever I go. Nope, if they're loud, that means that ambush. Obviously, with these characters, with the goblin bosses in the mix, not good. Can absolutely come in and absolutely wreck your day with an ambush. Now, sometimes players are smart, and sometimes players will try to set their own ambush. They'll try to bait monsters out if they know monsters are ahead. Maybe our rogue goes out and scouts, and they see that these guys are in here, and I might go, oh, what are they doing? What are they doing? I roll a d10. This is one of the things that was on here. What are they doing? I rolled a 6. They're doing this. It seems like they're just kind of lounging around. You see one of the goblins is whittling on a piece of wood. Another two are quietly talking, seem like they're kind of laughing, having a good time about something. So that's what my monsters pre-battle thing. It's just a fun thing that I use. So when they're like, what are the monsters doing? I'm like, I don't know. They're doing this. Now when I build adventures and dungeons, I typically... Oh, sorry. I'm going to sneeze. I promise I'm going to sneeze. Nope, now it's going away. And it's gone. It's gone. It's gone. This is one of the things that I now use. I use a table like this when I'm actually building my adventures. So that way I don't have to... I think about what they're doing in the room when they first encounter the player characters, whether that's the player characters walking into the room or they hear the player characters being loud. So, and I also know if they're resting, maybe one or two of them's asleep, that tells me that not only are they not setting up an ambush, we're going to say slash ambushed, it means they're probably not wearing their gear. And this is a super secret way. If you really want to throw some high level humanoid monsters at a creature, just be like, well, they're just not prepped for combat yet. Which generally means that, like, they can't put on armor. Other than, I think leather armor is the only one you can realistically put on during a fight, because I think it takes an action to don. We can look it up real quick. Don or doff a shield. If I look up doff. So it's an action. It's under the armor table. Light armor takes a minute. Yeah, so you can't, in a combat, realistically, you cannot put on or take off armor. Unless you have special, like, cast off armor and special types of armor that are able to put on or off. So shield right now is the only thing that you can basically don or doff, which is a weird way to refer to a shield, but yes. So if you want to use a higher level monster, maybe you want to throw some drow at them, just be like, they catch the drow unaware, they don't have their armor on, they don't have their weapons ready. That's an easy way to do that, and then you have to appropriately change their stat block though. So let's say they caught these goblin bosses by surprise, they don't have their chain shirt on. So they don't have that 13. They don't have their shield on. So they only have a +2 mod to dex. They have an AC of 12 when you first find them. And they're going to pick up their weapons because they probably have their scimitars nearby and they're just going to unsheath them. And then they might grab their shield as well. So then they go from having a 12 AC to a 14 AC and their sword. So again, dials. You can really kind of tweak your settings, sliders and dials to change things up. Make things fit what you need them to fit. So if you go, oh, this is going to be... I like these monsters, but they're going to be a little bit too difficult. Like a goblin boss with an AC of 17 for a 4th level party. that's going to be a lot of missed attacks still. They're still going to, at a 4th level party, they're probably got... they probably got, what, a +6 to hit? So they still need to roll an 11 on the die, which means they're going to miss as much as hit most of the time. Especially if they're not able to get advantage on things, and if you're able to give them disadvantage or do things like the Nilbog where you're able to just get rid of damage or spread it around, you might want to drop those ACs. That's a good way to do it. Now, this thing also works. Now, all this stuff works absolutely for players too. Remember that when players go to sleep, they can't wear their armor, other than light armor. So your fighter who's wearing Splint, they're not wearing that when they're asleep because they can't sleep in it. So assuming that they are asleep, and they probably don't have it on during their watch either because somebody has to spend time to put it on with them. And the person who's coming off watch is like, I'm going to bed. I'm not helping you with that. So these are all things that you can do against the players as well. And then your battle start position. So you also get to a position where they are. If you want to make it easier, for most parties, you place the monsters really close to the player characters. If you want to make it difficult, usually spread that out. Because then that means things like fighters and barbarians and a lot of rogues, and they're going to be an extreme disadvantage, and, except for your casters and people using bows, who can fire, over 60, 120, 150 range is like the short range for those weapons or spells. They're going to be able to hit things from across this gigantic room, apparently, without any issue across the battlefield. And we do know that our golem bosses have short bow, so if we want to put them in the advantage, because short bow range is 60? 80. So if you wanted to start them out at, let's say, if I was going to trying to make things a little bit more difficult, I might say, I'm going to start these guys out at 90 feet away, because the short range is 80 feet. That means that the player characters, it means the goblins can move up 10 feet, fire a volley, and then move back 20 feet. So they can start at 90 and end up at 100 feet, which means that the player characters will need to waste basically an entire dash action to even get within most striking range for most spells and most thrown weapons too. Even for long range, they'd run 60, so they'd still be 40 feet away and not be able to do anything else on their turn, which means that all your bad guys are going to get a second volley before they're forced to be in melee. They do a second volley and move back again if they need, depending on the battlefield. Again, right now we're basically fighting on a featureless white plain. We know that it's in a cave, so flying is kind of off limits for the most part, but the actual size and dimensions of the cave room we have not made at all, which is a good way to do it. That's the way I like to do it now, is to kind of dial in what I think the size of the room should be later, once I figure out maybe what the encounter is going to be in that room. But yeah, that's a very easy way where battle start positioning means a whole lot. If some of our monsters are asleep, guess what? They're prone and they're asleep, which means they're unconscious, which means really bad. They are stunned and they're prone. They don't have held items. So the stun condition, I think, is auto crit, right? Nope. Attackers have advantage. I thought it was an auto crit on stunned. Maybe I'm not. What am I thinking of? Oh, it's incapacitated, isn't it? No. I know. Oh, paralyzed. That's what I'm thinking of. Paralyzed is the one where it's auto crits, not stunned. Even though stunned sounds like it should be worse than paralyzed. But yeah, still bad. Attackers have advantage, and they're going to have to waste time getting up, which means they can't move as much. But yeah, these are, right, we can dial things in as we want, their readiness. And let's talk about morale. Well, let's do it this way. Let's put injury, what is it, 3/4. We have 1/4 and 0 HP. I make So, morale. Morale is a very useful thing if you're not using it in your games. It is a great way to deal with a lot of combats. One of the biggest complaints we get, or you will probably hear, or may have experienced, is that fights take too long. Fights take a long time in D&D. And the truth is that it isn't the problem. The problem isn't usually that the fight takes a long time. It's that the fights are kind of boring, because every fight kind of starts off unbalanced. You don't know if the player characters are going to come out on top. You don't know if they're going to have to run. But somewhere through the combat, usually in rounds 2 and 3, you start to figure out, okay, it becomes clear which side is probably going to win, which is 9 times out of 10 is going to be the player characters or your players. The other 10% of the time, you have to really make it very clear that they're in a bad position, because players will often get themselves killed by not realizing they should run away. So you really have to be consistent and be like, things are going badly for you. You should maybe think about running. So, morale. What does this mean? It's a different scale. Same one that's going to be in this one. Yeah. Alright, /group. So what does this mean? So, lots of monsters, bog standard, I usually say, most monsters are willing to fight till they get to about half their hit points are gone. And then they have to start thinking about whether they're going to stay in the fight or not, because things are starting to get dangerous for them. But each monster is kind of different depending on what they're doing. So I think that a lot of beasts, especially like predators, you have things like anything from displacer beasts to wolves. They may be, if their only motivation for the fight is hunger, like they're trying to get a meal, if you prove yourself to be defensible as a player character, they're gonna be like, all right, I'm not trying to get killed, just trying to get a hot meal. So they might only fight till injury. Displacer beast jumps out, does a couple bats, jumps around a few times, finally gets injured by somebody because of the displacement quality, and then on his turn maybe he turns around and runs away. It's a different way to address combat encounters. Not every combat encounter has to be this long slog, drawn out fight. Be like, once it's clear that goals shift, or they're not going to get, or things become lethal, etc. So our displacer beast might be like, these guys are clearly more work than they're worth. This displacer beast comes down, maybe gets a couple bats on some people, gets hit with a good arrow from the ranger or something like that, turns around and is like, that's good enough, I'm going to run away now. And then guess what? If you do that, one of the great things about morale and having monsters flee, we'll put it down here, and we'll say retreat / flee. They might be fleeing, they might be retreating. One of the nice things about having them run away means that they're always an unknown quantity. That means that you can always pull the displacer beast back in the adventure. I don't know why I'm using a displacer beast. That's actually not a very good thing. We're doing a goblin cave system. Let's something that might be in there, like a carrion crawler is a good idea. So the carrion crawler is basically wants to eat dead bodies. Shows up. Oh no, there are these guys. Hits him with the paralyzed poison. Chomps down on the cleric. The wizard hits him with a magic missile. And this thing's like, yep, not trying to die, just trying to eat. And so it wriggles its way back down the hallway, while the players take pot shots at it, rather than chase it down. Sometimes your players are going to want to chase them down, and you can do that if you want to. Nice thing is that by chasing monsters, they will probably lead you into another encounter. So it's not always the best thing to do as a player character. But they make decisions, they have to live by the consequences of their own decisions sometimes. That's fighting to injury. Fighting to 3/4 is somebody who's like motivated to be there, but not super good. This is a good place for like really bottom rung goblins. If they don't have like a goblin boss or some other sort of superior on top of them, they tend to be portrayed as very cowardly creatures. 3/4 will work for that. So, you know, our goblin bosses, not a good example because we have goblin bosses, but, you know, what is a quarter of their hit points? It's about 4 or 5 hit points. If they take, unfortunately, just about one good hit because our HP levels are low, which is kind of basically like taking an injury, they'll probably turn around and try to, you know, maybe book it. This makes a difference once you have monsters that have a lot more hit points. So if we wanted to look at, what was that? What was it? Our ogre had like 60 hit points or something like that. Yeah, 68 hit points. So that's what, 34, or half that again is 17. So if they took 17 points of hit points, that's a lot different than taking an injury, which might only be like 7 hit points. They fight to 3/4, generally something that's motivated. Could be cowardly, could be like, oh, I'm just kind of here, like, I'm really just kind of drawing a paycheck. I'm really, like, I don't have a lot of loyalty to these people or anything like that. It's a good place to put that 3/4 mark. Another good 3/4 mark would be somebody like bandits are a good 3/4 mark. They're like, look, we're trying to rob people, and sure, we expect this. Occasionally we fight people, we try to rob people, and they resist us. So we're cool to step in here for like a round, but once it gets into like 2 rounds and these people aren't surrendering and they're dealing damage to us, then they're like, I mean, we'll look for greener pasture somewhere else. We'll look for somebody who's a little bit easier to rob. They might start running. Half hit points is generally where I put most monsters as baseline. Most monsters I feel like will stay in the fight until they take about half their hit points and damage, and then they're like, okay, things are getting like maybe lethal, and I'm not trying to die for this. I'm trying to get out of here. 1/4 monsters that fight the 1/4 are more veteran kind of monsters. Disciplined monsters, this is where I would put things like hobgoblins for sure. Hobgoblins are very disciplined, so they're for sure going to fight till at least 1/4 hit points. They're disciplined, they believe in their cause, or the thing that they're trying to protect or whatever is important, or they have vengeance against you, against the player characters for whatever reason, or what they represent. They're going to stay in there until at least, you know, 3/4 of their hit points are gone, and then they'll think about running. And then 0. Most creatures do not fight to 0. There are a few creatures on baseline who will fight to 0. Those are constructs and undead, mindless creatures that do not have a will of their own, and no sort of concept of mortality. Now, you get smarter undead, they might not fight to 0, but things like zombies, skeletons, I'd probably even throw ghouls in there as well, even though ghouls are semi-intelligent. But once you start getting into gas and whites and vampires, vampire spawn I'd still probably put down there, maybe 1/4. But like more like vampire lords, like true vampires, things like that, Strugoys, they're not going to fight to 0. Those guys are going to fight till probably half. You're like, nope, this is lethal. I'm not going to hang out. I'm not trying to die here. And this already, by doing this, just changing when somebody's going to run, takes your combats from being, 45 minutes to easily to only 30 minutes. You really truncate that time down once it's clear who's going to win. And then nice thing is, like I said, these creatures are always in the wind if they get away, which means you can roll them in as reinforcements for later combats if you want to make things even more difficult. If you need to bump things up, you can always have them show back up later. A really great example was the dungeon I was running where they had this big Dark Mantle fight. I've talked about this before. And the Dark Mantle fight came in and really whomped them pretty good. There was one Dark Mantle left, and it boogied out, and it decided to leave and fly away. Later on in the dungeon, they get attacked by that same Dark Mantle who comes down, and it's not really even a combat. It's like not even a full round. It has the ability to drop down and hit another player character with its iconic ability, use its darkness. They go through the darkness, they kill the thing, they tear it off the person's head, they kill the thing. And shows, it was nice because in the fiction, like in the narrative, it shows this progression of really, really dropping the ball and almost totally getting almost a full TPK when they first met the creatures to their second run-in with the creature. They're like, oh, we know how to deal with this creature now. Which is great. It shows that sort of growth and progression and that representing the experience they got from that first combat immediately within the same dungeon, which is really cool. So yeah, that's what most things. Other characters that will fight to 0 include anybody who's like a zealot. So some cultists and things like that will fight to 0 that are insane or have lost their mind or are fully tied to a cause in some way or form. They're going to fight to 0. Like I said, zealots. Zealots is a good way to round that out. So that talks about, obviously, hit points. So you will notice down here I put hit points / group. So what does that mean? So this is another way that you can add it in. You can just play it hit points if you want. That's very easy. You can also just play it group. I tend to use a mixture of both, having both be criteria, but you don't have to do that. And if you're just starting out, I would say just use one or the other until you get used to that framework, and then you can start doing both. So the group one, our second one here, is that how many, instead of counting the HP for when somebody needs to start making morale checks, you start looking at how much of their side of the party is gone. Obviously, it doesn't work very well with solo encounters. You're going to have to use the HP for that. But for our current encounter that we have pulled up, we've got how many? 8 creatures in here. So when we have 8, it means that's a good number for us because that's all divisible by 4. So good on me, serendipity. So if we fight to injury, so fight to injury just means they fight until somebody goes down in the grouping, which means so if we have this group that's fighting, we've got our Nilbog and our Goblin bosses, and they're all riding on top of these wargs as they charge into combat. The rogue pops out of hiding and fires an arrow off at the warg, who I don't think has very many hit points. Right? No, they've got okay hit points. Right? Yeah, they got 26 hit points, so probably not going to do it in one. But maybe in that first round, maybe multiple people target that same warg or that same goblin boss. They're not able to swap out for whatever reason. Maybe they use their reaction for something else. And they take down let's just say, what I was trying to angle at is they fire off some arrows and a firebolt from the wizard, and they're able to take out one of the wargs under one of the goblin bosses. So this warg falls and this goblin boss goes tumbling in the dirt across the ground, rolling across the ground as their mounts taken out from under them. Now, this is when the group would all need to start roll because one of their monsters has been taken down. And so, again, really cowardly. Now, again, the goblin bosses are going to be the people who usually have a lot more discipline, so they're not going to fight till 3/4. They're going to definitely fight till half. As opposed to normal goblins, who are very cowardly. If you want to portray goblins that way, you don't have to. But if you want to lean into that aspect of the fiction to do that. So that's what fighting to injury. Fighting 3/4. 2 monsters go down. If we have 8, half the monsters go down. 3/4. Once there's 2 guys left, and those 2 guys I might not even do checks. They might be like, yeah, we're just gonna run. So what do I mean by checks? So charisma roll under. So roll under checks are things that used to be is kind of an old school D&D thing, but I do find them to be very useful in this particular context. It's pretty much the only time that I use a roll under for D&D 5e 2024, and I only do it just so I don't have to make the DC. Now, I do use room DC, so I could do the room DCs, but most monsters, as will be exhibited here, have kind of trash charisma scores. They almost never have any decent charisma scores or decent charisma saves. So even our warg here, yeah, charisma -1. So instead, I do a roll under mechanic, so I don't have to worry about the DC stuff. I can look at any stat block and know what their charisma save is going to be. Instead, what I do is I just roll a d20. I need to roll their charisma or lower. This is one of the things where rolling a natural 1 is actually really good, not really bad. So I'll roll them for all the monsters on their turn, be like, okay, they've hit their threshold. I'm going to roll for this warg. They roll a 7. Their charisma's an 8. They're going to stay in the fight. This goblin boss's turn is coming up. I'm going to roll d20 for them. They rolled a 15. Well, their charisma's only a 10, so they definitely did not roll under. So this one's going to try to run away. Try to get itself out of combat. And then you might have an interesting thing. Maybe they have an interesting dynamic where you talk about, oh, well, it tries to, like, grab the fur of its warg and whip it around, try to get it to turn around, and the warg's not having it. So it just abandons the warg and just jumps off the warg and starts running the other direction, but the warg's going to stay in the fight. Then you could just layer the fiction on top of it to show what happened. Like, oh, the warg made their save, but the boss didn't. The boss is running. And the boss, remember, doesn't necessarily mean they're fleeing combat. They can just be retreating. Ooh, maybe that goblin boss shouts back over their head, like, I'm going to go get reinforcements in Goblin. You have to ask the players, does anybody speak Goblin? If somebody does, be like, I speak Goblin. Oh, well, this guy said, this guy said he's going to go get reinforcements. Or raise the alarm or something like that. And now that changes the goals of the combat. Now the goal is like, oh, well, we don't want more monsters to show up, so we got to make sure that guy who's running away gets dead fast. Like this round fast. So we're going to take all the attacks from these guys that we can, because we got to shoot arrows and firebolts or catch up and tackle that guy if you're the fighter. Make sure that guy doesn't make it out of this room so he can call for backup. Or else the fight's going to get a lot more difficult. Which is a very, very quick and dirty and easy way to bump up your combat in the middle of it, especially if you have humanoid creatures or creatures that have language. If they're in a dungeon or something, is that, let's say that you did that Undercooked thing where it was just the Hobgoblin Devastator, and they're able to survive through the first round of combat, but you're like, this combat is not. I thought this was going to be like a pretty medium combat, and they are just whomping this guy, and he's got like 10 hit points left. Be like, okay, cool. He disengages and runs and starts yelling for help, and then that gives you the ability to be like, hey, if you guys don't stop this guy, or even if they do kill him, you can be like, at the end of the round, more goblin reinforcements show up. Maybe a goblin boss and some goblins shows up. It doesn't necessarily have to be like a full another fight, but just be like, oh, I just wanted to add a little bit more something to this fight specifically, because it wasn't leveled how I wanted it to be leveled. So you can always bring in reinforcements or have characters run away, monsters run away. Very easy way, in a very narrative fiction, within the fiction way, to be like, I can adjust these things. Now, hard to have characters run away if they're winning. Instead, you need somebody who's in charge to like point at goblins and be like, go get the boss, or, go get the manacles or chains or whatever. We're going to tie these guys up. They just need an order for something to send them off. So yeah, that's it. That's it for the readiness and morale. So we're at about 1:45 into the stream. As usual, this thing always takes way longer than I thought it would. So next thing we're going to talk about is Battlefield. So this is pretty much most everything you need to know about the opposition. But what about the Battlefield? Again, we can take a look at how far we've come. So we said that most Dungeon Masters kind of stop here. And that's where they stop. They kind of look at the party level, the challenge rating, the adventure tier that they're in. You don't generally want to cross adventure tiers with bad guys, because that screws up the multi-attack stuff. So we said it would be really different. So we had this, just because we had it. Let's do our Goblin Lord. Just because I don't think I talked about this. Let's get these guys out of here. Ooh, I didn't talk about grouping. We should talk about grouping, I guess. Ah, dang it. I forgot about grouping. We'll talk about grouping. I'm still going to take a break. I gotta take a bio break, but we'll come back, we'll do grouping, and then we'll move on. I forgot to do grouping. That's my bad. But say, instead of that Hobgoblin Devastator, if we want to do the Hobgoblin Warlord, this is a high feels deadly kind of combat. And you're like, okay, what's the difference here? He's 2 CR higher, but like, what's the actual difference? Well, let's look at it. So we need a Hobgoblin I can't spell. Hobgoblin. Warlord. Alright, so first off, the HP has 112 HP, significantly more. And actually, we'll do this. Let's do the Devastator so we can see the stat blocks next to each other. This guy's got 45 hit points. This guy's got 112. So, 3 times the amount of hit points. He's harder to hit, AC 20 versus 13. He has good initiative. He has maxed out. Actually, he doesn't have maxed out this. He just has proficiency index in initiative. Weird. So yeah, speed, CR6. Got great stats. Everything's in the positive. The only thing that he doesn't have a mod to is wisdom, and he does have proficiency in that save. He has no save that's less than 13. Or plus 3, so a 13. Yeah, plus 3. He has no save that's under plus 3. Which is really good. This creature has really good saves. Good saves, good armor class, good hit points. This guy's going to be tough to fight. But not particularly immune to anything. Doesn't have any resistances or immunities. So everything will work well against him. He's just hard to hit and he's got a bunch of hit points. And he's going to save a bunch. Got the Aura of Authority. So he has this 30-foot emanation. This creature and all its allies have advantage on attacks and saving throws provided the Hobgoblin doesn't have the incapacitating. Whoa, so they have great saves and, which includes this guy, has advantage on all its attack rolls and just all the time. That is a wild trait. Yeah, this thing is going to demolish the party. It just always has advantage on all its attacks, and it gets to make 3 attacks. This is why you can't use, once you cross that threshold, right, we crossed adventure tiers, so levels 1 through 4, we have 4th level adventurers. You try to throw a 6th level adventurer at them, this guy has 3 attacks that he's going to make per round, so they technically have better action economy with 4, versus his 3 that he gets to make. But the thing is that his longsword, I'm sorry, that's a javelin. Still his longsword. So they do double damage. So they only get 3 attacks, but they do damage as if they were doing basically 6 attacks, because their longsword and javelins and stuff do double dice. So instead of 1d8 plus 3, he does 2d8 plus 3. So he's doing 6 attacks worth of damage when he hits. If he hits with all 3. And then if he crits on top of that, that's closer to like 12 attacks in 1 round. If he crit on all 3 attacks, which is, you know, I'd say unlikely, but he literally has advantage on all attacks. So it's going to come up more often than not. Or more often than it would normally. And has advantage on all saves. It's wildly powerful. Yeah, you throw this guy with other hobgoblins in the mix, woof, that's a tough fight. And especially because the emanation is 30 feet. That's the entire battlefield, pretty much. And has parry. Awesome. Where it adds 3 to its AC. So, baby's first shield with parry. And they can do it every round without a limited resource. Now, unlike shield, the parry only goes against that attack, which is better. Which is the trade-off for it not being a limited resource with the spell slot. So yeah, if you try to throw the Hobgoblin Warlord at it, once you cross that threshold where it's going to have too many attacks, it's doing more damage because it's doing double damage. Because its damage is scaling like a cantrip's damage does, but it also gets multiple attacks. And it gets advantage on all this. Like, this thing is like wildly overpowered. Even for a CR6. Like, this thing's a tank. You throw this is like the big guy. This is the big bad guy who's at the end of this complex. For sure. And they definitely need to level up at least once before they reach this monster. This warlord's gonna eat their lunch, especially if it has any sort of allies with it. So yeah, that's why you don't do that. That's why you don't cross the adventure tier whenever you can avoid it. Which means trying to do solo combats is difficult because solo CRs need to be much higher to do it unless you're going to fiddle with a bunch of stuff like layer actions and resistances and legendary actions and other things, which we could talk about, but that would be a fully different video to talk about custom making a monster into a solo. But the thing we did not talk about, which was the main thrust of why I wanted to do this whole stupid thing, was to talk about groupings. But we should put it actually up here, because I skipped over it. So grouping should be here, right? That's right. Did I miss anything else before we move on? Gosh knows I did. I most assuredly did. I most assuredly did. So this will probably be all this. We may not even have time to get to the battlefield. We still got a lot to get through. So if that's the case, we'll just come back and do this probably next week. We'll sit in and do it. So if you're liking this content, we're going to probably do more of it next week, because we got plenty more to talk about. Because right now we're still only talking about bad guys, and next time we're going to talk about the battlefield, like the actual environment in which you fight in. We'll go ahead with the environment. So, things that I forgot that we need to talk about, I'm going to add it in here. It's going to be alternative goals. And where I really should have put it was kind of, should I put it in tactics and strategy? It's very related to tactics and strategy is the thing. And maybe I'll just add it as under tactics and strategy. That's fine. Yeah, we'll do this. Because, yeah, this is basically the monster mix. No, I'm going to split this. I'm going to say synergy with other monsters, and then I'm going to do synergy with environment. Alright, so we're going to do our monster mix. Yeah, that's fine. We'll leave it in here. Let's talk about alternative goals first, because the monster mix is going to take a bit. Like I said, I still want to take a little bio break, or I do too much of a little dance in my pants. Not in a weird way. Don't make it weird. So alternative goals. So most goals are kill or be killed. But that doesn't have to be what the combat's about. Combat could be getting through the room. Could be the goal. Your goal could be healing. It could be we'll also put in here MacGuffin. I'll say, how do I word that? Protecting escort. Is that the word? Yeah. Protecting escortee. Those are the most common. Well, I mean, you can kind of come up with goals. You just need to know, we'll put that, motivation. It's just kind of understanding what the good guys and the bad guys' motivation is for the room in which this combat is going to happen. The situation that they are going to be in. What is everybody trying to do here? Oh, goodness gracious. I'm just messing things up on my own mic. Stop it! That'll do. So, this is generally what people go through, right? If we thought about that first level things, if we're thinking about it up here, we're like, oh, I know what the party level is, I know what CR to kind of use, don't use anything that's too high level, don't use anything that's too low level, where you have the same sort of inverse problems that you have with using a higher CR monster. And I know that I need to kind of keep the odds and action economy kind of equitable, we'll put it that way. Go, alright. We don't ever really address this. We assume that if you're getting into a combat, the general base assumption in D&D, and D&D does not do a lot of good job telling you not to do this, is that your role in combat is either to kill all the monsters or, you know, be killed by all the monsters. And another one we could put in here is gather information. That can be an alternative goal. But most combats don't go beyond, and a lot of, especially newer Dungeon Masters, don't go beyond kill or be killed. Like, that is the end-all be-all. Sometimes it'll be capture. Occasionally, that can always throw in a nice wrinkle, and really all you got to do. The only difference between kill or be killed and captured is that with capture, you basically, the last player who deals damage has to be like, and I do non-lethal damage. And then you tie them up. Now, that can be its own thing, where that transitions in its own thing, where you have to now keep track of this person who's not your party, part of your party, was going to screw up all your stealth attempts, who's going to, if you leave them alone, is going to try to get away from you. So having a hostage is really difficult for a D&D party. It is often why they just kill people. Don't want to deal with it. Or if they let them go, there's always this fear that if somebody surrenders and I let them go, that they'll come back and attack me later. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. I generally don't have those monsters come back and attack them. But occasionally, depending on kind of how the interaction goes and, you know, maybe how their morale is, maybe they do. But really, you want to move beyond that as far as motivation, both for the monsters and for the player characters. So, what are some other things they might want to get out of the combat? So once you change the goal, you guys aren't playing the same game. And that means that you can have a combat in which... I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. You can have a combat in which the player characters win the combat. They win the combat. But also the monsters accomplish their goal. So I'm going to jump ahead... we can do gather information. So if they want to know maybe what the monsters are trying to accomplish, maybe the goblins are trying to accomplish. Let's use the example of the Nilbog and the goblin bosses, and they're on their wargs and they're riding in because they've heard somebody coming. They've heard that there are intruders within their cave system. So they're charging down there. Maybe their primary goal is to just gather information. They just need to know who's in here and what they're doing. They roll up there and they see 4 adventurers, and those adventurers turn on them and immediately start shooting arrows at them. And they're like, all right, well, we met our goal, so we're actually not going to stay in this combat any longer. We're instead going to go alert everybody that adventurers are here and to be prepared for them. And hey, we know that at least 2 of them shoot spells. One of them's got a whole bunch of armor on, and one of them, maybe they didn't even see the rogue, so they think there's only 3. And so the rogue's this unknown element until they figure that out later. That's a good way to, like, prompt the rogue player to be like, oh, you're actually the wild card variable that people don't know about in this fight. Which is very roguish to be like, and I jump out of the shadows and stab that guy. Cool. Yeah, that works. So gathering information. So if they walk in there and they see, oh, these are belligerents in here and they're firing spells, we know a little bit about their capabilities, we know what's going on. We're going to circle around and start telling other people so other people can get prepared for them. The PCs technically win that combat because the bad guys all ran away. But they also kind of lost the combat because now all the monsters are going to be much more difficult combats with a much more clued in on the PC's abilities and to be prepared for them. So, right, we changed the game. We changed the goal of the game and the motivation of the monsters. And again, if you run the combat like that, it's like maybe a 2-round combat. It's 1 or 2 rounds. 1 round, they're going to burst onto the scene with their wargs. They're going to get some spells shot at them. They're going to take a few arrows. Maybe somebody runs up to try to swing a sword at them. And then they retreat. Not necessarily because they lost morale, and that's definitely how you narrate it, is be like, no, they're wheeling and they're leaving. And they're, kicking their heels to their wargs and taking off back down the hallway. and maybe they start raising the alarm, and so things just go very poorly for the party right out the gate because they decided not to stealth for whatever reason. And they don't attempt to stop them. Though it's going to be hard to stop them on war because they're going to be faster anyways. You're not going to kill all those guys. Unless your wizard has a clutch spell like web or something like that where they can just seal off the exit. And force them to find the room. That's classic wizard shenanigans. When they're at their best. Controlling the battlefield. So that's a gather information. Getting through the room, this is a good PC one. Where it's just like, oh, the important part here is not killing the monsters, but actually just getting to the other side of the room. This is a lot of ways how I will often do things like traps or puzzle-ish traps. Be like, no, your goal is to get out of this room on the other side of this room. Not to try to get rid of the trap, not to deal with all the enemies in here. A good way to do that is, a classic way that I like to do that is like, there's a causeway over a giant pit, and then there are all these sort of archer spots where goblins can shoot archers from behind cover and stuff. And then be like, you could sit here, but you're wide in the open in the middle of this area. And be like, oh, there seems to be a somewhat endless or functionally endless amount of goblins, random goblins who can show up and take shots at you. And that would be something like if we wanted to do just, we're gonna take out this. I was just like, oh, well, how many goblins are there? It's like, oh, well, technically right now there's like, I don't know, like 8. There's 8 shooting at you. So basically everybody gets 2 shots at them around while they're out there. And maybe this causeway is like 90 feet or something. So like you're going to be stuck out there for sure if you try to get across. There's no way you can pass it in from one safe area to another safe area without being exposed at some point. Okay, so they have to run across this causeway. And then on the walls there's like these berths where the like not crevices, cracks or goblin archers. They're like natural arrow slits where they can have cover and they can stand out and they can take shots at people. They don't get any advantage or anything, but they do basically get free shots, and they would be like, this doesn't make sense for the party to sit on the causeway and try to kill all these individual goblins who are all over the place that they can't physically reach along the sides, because there's this big chasm in between them. And you might go, oh, there's 8. But how many could I functionally put in here? Because it's going to be a lot with the new math. There we go. Okay. So I could put up to almost 60 in here. And by the new encounter math, this is why we can't use the encounter math anymore. Or at least I can't. At a level 4 party of 4 characters should be able to fight almost 60 goblins. It does not take long for you to know that, oh, well, the action economy of that is not going to work. Right? Yeah. But that means that if we did that, that's what? 60 divided by 8? I don't know what that is off the top of my head. Almost 8? Yeah, almost 8. 7 to 8 sort of like reinforcement waves. Characters be like, you guys, and you have to be, sometimes you have to be very clear about this as a DM, be like, you do not know how many goblins there are, but you know you guys have killed 4 and another one takes their spot. And you get the idea that there are more numbers here, that it doesn't make sense that you will kill all the monsters in this way. Like, you need to move on. You can't do it this way. Like, this is a different type of goal for our encounter. Our encounter is, the goal for you guys in this encounter is not to kill all the goblins in this room, because there's 60 goblins in this room. You need to just get across the causeway and out of this room, where you're not going to be exposed anymore as you're on your way to your destination. So totally different. Now, arguable whether that is a combat or non-combat encounter. But, you know, maybe there's something they're doing to, like, rush. This could be a cool thing where you set up the thing. Be like, oh, maybe in one of these holes there's, like, a drawbridge, and they're lowering the drawbridge slowly down to the causeway, and you can see that there's, like, 30 goblins back in there, like, champing at the bit to try to like lower the drawbridge or run across so they can engage you melee. And that'll tell your player characters to be like, okay, we need to just like go. We can't fight 30 goblins on a tiny causeway like this. They're gonna destroy us. You gotta be very clear about what the intention is and what the direction is that you want them to go. Sometimes by being like, this is not a combat you just win by swinging swords. Stealing gear or supplies or a MacGuffin. This is one of my favorite ones. Yeah, take your character's stuff. Now, yeah, you don't necessarily always want to take their magic sword just because they have a magic sword and the goblins just take it from them, like disarm them and take it. Not necessarily that. You can do that, but it's more like, I'd focus more on the MacGuffin. Like if they have something specific they're using for this quest, would be a good thing. Maybe they've got like one of those lanterns that reveals like hidden doors or secret passages or something like that. And the goblins know maybe what that thing is. They've been warned against specifically an item like that because of what it does. Maybe there's a whole bunch of secret passages in this cavern system that they use. They're like, one of their primary goals for combat is like, we need to get the lantern and get it away from these people so they can't find our hidden passages. So that becomes the thing that they're trying to do in combat, is trying to wrest this from, I mean, let's be honest, it's probably the cleric who might have it in their hand. Maybe the wizard, because they need a free hand to hold up the lantern. It's probably one of those two. And so they'll grab it and try to run away with it. Now, if that's the party's only light source, they're going to be in a lot of trouble. If these goblins are able to swarm over the wizard and grab the lantern away from them and run back off down one of their little warren holes somewhere, hidey holes, who knows where, and then immediately everybody's just plunged into abject darkness in this cavern. Different consequence now. Our goblins will be affected by no light as well because of how dark vision works in the game. But they have enough numbers that it probably won't matter. You do that. Another one that I like to do for random encounters, or like, especially random encounters that happen overnight, is to use things like stealing gear or supplies. That's what they're getting robbed. Bandits attack. Bandits aren't here to kill you. Bandits are here to bandit. They're here to take your stuff. Goblins are sneaking into your camp and grabbing your things and running away with them. They don't want to be in a fight. Them getting into a fight is a fail state for them, for what they're trying to do. So they might be just like rummaging through, let's say you have a wagon or your horse's saddlebags or stuff like that. Maybe it's the horse that wakes you up because they're freaking out because there's these little goblins trying to get at them. And then, that's what the fight kicks off. It's like, the person on watch didn't notice them, flips around to see that there's like two goblins crawling on top of the horse trying to get things out of its saddlebags or something like that. And that's where the kicks off. And so they're going to chase them down, but the goblins aren't necessarily trying to fight back. The goblins are trying to grab stuff and run. And maybe they scatter in all different directions. Maybe it becomes more of a chase encounter than a fight, and then be like, if we all chase them, does that mean the other goblins will have the opportunity to ransack our camp while we're all gone chasing down this one goblin? And next is protecting the escortee, which is basically the same thing as stealing gear, except the gear is alive. Our MacGuffin is a live person. That's it for alternative goals and motivation. So when you change what the goals are, the combat will feel very different. Because imagine playing a fighter and you get into a fight and none of the goblins are taking swings at you. They're all busy trying to do stuff other than you. And then you're like, should I, instead of killing these guys, be trying to stop them from doing something? That should be a realization your players should have as they go through that. Or they'll mindlessly kill goblins and the goblins will get away with something they needed. Maybe it's their food. And just run away with their food, and that's generally a big problem for especially lower level parties. Because create food and water? Assuming somebody isn't using the broken Outlander background. Create food and water is a 3rd level, so they don't have access to that as a 4th level party yet. They can't create food or water. Now if they have somebody who has the Outlander background, be like, oh, they can find food. Yeah, but that still takes time. And that takes time foraging in this. I was assuming this is a random encounter, so foraging in the forest where you know there are a bunch of goblins running around, so that doesn't seem like a good thing to go off and do by yourself. So those sorts of things. Very simple. Just by changing that. And then we're going to talk about our monster mix. And we're actually going to take a look at... I pulled up the notes. I want to talk about the ones that are presented in the 4th edition Dungeon Master's Guide, which is a fantastic book. If you're looking for sort of just a good book on how to run games, that's probably one of my top recommendations. I've also heard that the Pathfinder 2e Game Mastery Guide is really good. I don't have any experience with that one. I have experience with the first edition Pathfinder Game Mastery Guide, which is also very good. It's on my shelf back there. I know you can't see it, but I've got it. I've pulled it out before. It's also a very good guide. So obviously in the 4th edition game, just like the Pathfinder one, is like you can't use the math in it, but its advice on how to do things like set up encounters is way more robust and way more like, here's brass tacks, here's how to do it, than the 5th edition or 2024 DMG is. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and talk about what it would look like, and we'll rebuild some of these similar encounters based off of that stuff. But I am going to take a bio break real quick. So hang out. I'm going to go do that. Come back, we'll run through that, and that's probably where we're going to have to end this one, because we're already at over 2 hours. So, as always, this always takes 10 times longer than I think it's going to. Mainly just because I'm talking. It's stuff that, as I'm running it down, doesn't take very much time, but once I start talking it out, turns out it's a deeper subject than I thought it was going to be. So, think about it. Think about the questions. If you have questions to ask, do that. And I'll be back in just a second, guys. All right? And we're back. We're back. We're back. We're back. All right. Delicious bean juice. So, we are going to hop in. We're going to talk about Monster Mix. So again, this is something that's from the 4th edition DMG. You know what? I'll just pull up the 4th edition DMG. Just so we're all on the same page, even though I don't need to look at it. I've already got the notes for it. But we'll pull it up anyways. For those who are unfamiliar with it, again, it is what I consider to be probably pretty much the gold standard for a Dungeon Master guide or Game Mastery guide. And not so many kind of measure up against. Certainly not the 5th edition and 2024 ones. I need D&D. 4th edition. Resources. Dungeon Master, Dungeon Master, Dungeon Master, Dungeon Master. Yep, Dungeon Master Guide. There we go. Alright. And we'll just go through the whole section. There we go. I just need to swap what we're looking at. Oh. There we go. Okay, sorry. Having a trouble getting it to pull up. So this is the building encounter section of the 4th edition DMG. It's quite good. It tells you right up front the monster rolls, encounter components, encounter templates, encounter settings. So we're going to be looking at the templates, but we can talk about monster rolls as well. This is not a thing. This was the thing that in 4th edition that didn't get sort of ported over in the 5th edition, though it's incredibly useful. And monster rolls are sort of like the monster equivalent in 4th edition, the monster equivalent of PC classes. They're not exactly the same, but they're kind of similar. So you have artillery, which is basically anything that sits in the back and shoots either spells or arrows, and etc. You have brutes. Those are monsters like the ogre, which is one of the things we looked at. They hit hard, but they're easy to hit. They don't have great saves. They pretty much have high HP, and they hit hard, but they don't hit very often. So they have low attack, high damage, low AC, high hit points. Is a way to think about them. Controllers are kind of like wizards. They are the people who control the battlefield. That's what the aspect is. They're doing crowd control for the most part. And they throw out debuffs and they do force movement, those kinds of things. A lurker is an ambusher. So we talked about how our goblins all have good stealth. That kind of puts them into the lurker thing, especially because the goblin bosses get extra bonus damage when they have advantage when they attack, which leads into they would hide, and they have hide as an action. So they are somewhat close to lurker, but they're also very close to leader, which is down here. Leader is somebody who buffs their party members. So it's the kind of the opposite of the controller. The controller is about debuffs and controlling the enemies. Leader is about buffing your allies and giving them advantageous positioning and things of that nature. Minions were a very 4E concept. They're really cool. I was really surprised it wasn't one of the things that got ported over to 5th edition. They're basically mooks that you throw in. They're basically monsters that always do static damage. They all have 1 hit point. They basically are just kind of fill stuff out and give the party different monsters to hit. They're really great for like showing off big AoE spells and stuff like that. Skirmishers. So skirmishers are kind of like just generic monsters. I would say that most goblins are skirmishers. Skirmishers generally use mobility, so having that built in where they have that sort of mild cunning action thing where they can disengage and hide, and I would say add dash to that to give them the full cunning action, would be skirmisher things. They don't stay at place one. They don't hit super hard. They don't have a ton of AC. They don't have great saves. They're just kind of basic monsters. Most basic, what we consider basic monsters, are kind of skirmishers. Soldiers are like our Hobgoblin Warlord, they generally have really good defenses and they hit pretty decently. They're meant to basically stay in the fight. They're supposed to be kind of like a frontline fighters, kind of like a fighter. The Skirmisher is very close to a fighter. They're supposed to have good AC, good hit points. They hit hard. Other creatures will do more damage than them, but they consistently do pretty good damage. And then they have elites and solos, which were different types of monsters. Basically, elites are like veterans. I would consider like our Hobgoblin Warlord would be very close to elite status. Like that's a monster that's a cut above the rest because they have good stats, they have good saves, they have good defenses, they have good attacks, they do good damage, they have that massive aura thing that helps out everything, gives everybody advantage. That's a very elite monster kind of thing, but they are meant to be fighting with other monsters, whereas solo monsters are meant to generally be fighting by themselves or with a bunch of mooks. Basically, it would be a really classic one in 4E was that you would do one of these solo monsters and then throw a bunch of minions in with them, or like waves of minions that would come in, adds, very World of Warcraft style. Who would be there to like disrupt. Like I said very much earlier, was like you could bring in, you might have minions that pop that explode, and that's kind of like the detritus thing. So it's like you actually don't want them around. So that's why they're a nuisance. And then the leader, and like it says here, leader's not a standalone role. And leaders are defined by their relationship to the monsters under their command. Because there were also leader PCs. 4E is a very odd duck, because in addition to the actual class, each of the classes fall under sort of like an archetype, which is a little bit similar to what they were kind of edging towards for the 2024 release, and be like, oh, and kind of like how the sidekicks function from Tasha's, that there are like warriors that include like fighters and barbarians and rangers and those sorts of things. There are mages, which include druids and all the casters. And then you have the experts, which include rogues. And I guess I should put rangers in that. Artificers, more skill-based. They do a bunch of stuff, often outside of combat as well. So they had stuff like that that all the classes fit under in 4th edition. They had defenders, who defend, strikers, who deal a bunch of damage, controllers, who control the battlefield, and leaders are the ones who kind of buff other allies. Your encounter components, we don't need that, that's all XP. The important thing down here is mixed roles, which is the thing we're going to talk about. Mixed encounters. Having an encounter that's nothing but the same creature is generally quite boring. You actually want to mix that up quite a bit. It'll actually make things, both more interesting to play for and have more tactical options. Like there will be, when everything's the same, it doesn't really matter which one you attack. When everything's not the same, now the decision on who to target is significantly more important. XP rewards, how to spend your XP budget, that's about big stuff. Alright, so encounter templates, this is what we're getting to do. The battlefield control, commander and troops, dragon den, double line, wolf pack. And those are most of them. And then simple substitutions for doing so. Encounter settings, interesting areas, that's the stuff we'll start. Some of the stuff is things we're going to start talking about in that next one. When we start talking about the terrain, we'll fall into more of that. So if you want to read ahead class, you can get your hands on the 4E Dungeon Master's Guide. I believe you can buy it straight from online, get the PDF of it. I don't think it's very expensive. You might be able to find a copy of it secondhand in a bookshop or a game store somewhere. I'd say if you have an opportunity to pick it up, it's a really great resource. As for like nuts and bolts, especially for a new DM about like how to run stuff. It's set up very much like that. We can see that just from the table of contents on the side. Chapter 1, how to be a DM, because we remember in the 5e DMG, the DMG starts off with like how to build a world, and you're like, that's not important for a new Dungeon Master to worry about. They're like, well, you need to create a cosmos. And Pantheon and all this stuff, and it's like, nope, don't do that. That is not right. Like, this is like how to be a DM, how to run the game, how to do combat encounters, how to build combat encounters, how to set up non-combat encounters, how do you put all the encounters together into an adventure, what do you put into your rewards for adventures, how do you put all those adventures into a campaign, where do you set the campaign, as in the world, and then you have the Dungeon Master's Toolbox, which is all the extra stuff, how to customize monsters, create monsters, making NPCs, dealing with house rules, creating random dungeons, and doing random encounters. I think this is where they do the random encounter deck, right? Yeah, the encounter deck, which is a cool idea, but I don't think that was a fully baked idea. I don't think that was quite as useful as they wanted it to be. And then chapter 10, you get Fall Crest, which is sort of like the introductory adventure, and gives you a good, like, nice place. Ninterville, like this area, is considered probably one of the best settings. It is considered by many to be one of the best settings in contemporary D&D. It's small. There's not too much. You've got mountains, forests all around it. So you're like, this is the game world. This is sort of like your little hex that you're playing in your hex map. This is your area. You've got Hammerfast, the Old Hills, the Moon Hills, Fall Crest is right in the middle of it, so it's good for any sort of like hex crawl if you want to do that, or it's just got a lot of stuff that's going on but doesn't have too much. And then some of these, like Gardmore Abbey has its own adventure, which I have. I have never run Gardmore Abbey because it is a monster of an adventure module. It's in 4 separate books. It comes in 4 separate books. Three or four? 4, I think. 4 separate books. It is very interesting. It deals with deck of many things stuff is in there. It's not that the place is massive. It's just that this place has every nook and cranny of it has stuff that's going on. There's just so much stuff that it's a really difficult one. Extensive dungeons lie beneath the ruins. Yeah. Hoarded wealth of the old crusading paladins. The Sword Barrow, Calton Manor, Hammerfast, Harken Forest, Keep on the Shadowfell, Kobold Hall, Ravenroost, Harkenwold, Ruins of Vastormel, I think. Not sure if I've ever said that out loud before. The Stone March, Temple of Yellow Skulls, Thunderspire, Winterhaven. Great stuff. And there are adventures for a lot of these. I think there's one for Kobold Hall. Keep on the Shadowfell, there's obviously one for the Abbey. There's one for Thunderspire's definitely. I think Thunderspire might be the Essentials box adventure for 40. Anyways, we're getting a little bit off topic, so let's focus up then. How about I focus up and stop thinking? So we don't need that anymore. I just wanted to show it off to you guys. If you guys haven't checked it out before, I would say, hey, go check it out. But let's get back to our thing. All right, so with our list, our monster mix. So let's just do the that way we can just we'll just get rid of this. There we go. Mix your monsters. That's very important. Mix up your monsters. Now, we could do an encounter with nothing but goblin bosses, and that would fit into one of these things that we're about to talk about. But in general, you want to mix up monsters. You want to have at least more than one monster per type. But you also don't want to have too many, or it's kind of a pain but to keep track of. I'd say 23. I'd say even depending on how many monsters you have in fight, but 2 to 3 is a sweet spot. At least it is for me, and I think it is for a lot of people. I'll just do that. 2 to 3 is a sweet. Put it that way. I think that having about 2 to 3 different types of different distinct monster stat blocks in a fight is about the sweet spot. It's enough that it's not overwhelming. You're not having to flip through pages and pages and pages to manage your combat, or print out multiple sheets, or swap between a whole bunch of different pages, or in D&D Beyond, or however you're using to run it. I like 2 now because 2 works really well with 5e tools. If I'm running out of 5e tools, and be like, oh, if I need to know, I mean, we can just do the example, but Goblin Boss. I could be like, okay, I've got that one, and then if I wanted to pull up Nilbog, that way it gives me very quick access to 2 different stat blocks. I mean, I could always open them in different tabs, but if I wanted to, like, quickly on my phone or something like that, I can just do this and then do the hover feature, and that'll give me the Nilbog stat block right on top of it very easily. But, I mean, there are ways that you just set them up to do that. And it kind of depends on whatever thing you're using to run for your stat blocks. But very easy to pull in. But about 2 to 3 is a really sweet spot, because if you have too many, it becomes hard for you to remember, and it'll become hard for the PCs or your players to often remember which monster is which type and what they do. So yeah, let's talk about some different sort of the basic different ones. Let me grab my list again. One of the basic different ones there are battlefield control, commander and troops, now obviously I've been running the game for a long time, running different games for a lot of time, so I've internalized a lot of these, so I don't think about them by their names, but I want to make sure we use their names. Dragon's Den, Double Line, Wolfpack, and I'm also just here. And Dragon's Den is basically a solo layer. Alright, so battlefield control. This is usually a caster in 5e 2024. A caster. Plus skirmishers. So caster versus skirmishers. So, if I was going to say, let's flip back. Say if I was going to make, we could use the Nilbog. This is kind of a caster and control one. But the Nilbog doesn't really have a ton of battlefield control other than just making people have disadvantage on stuff. And you can only do it on one character, so they don't really have any AoEs, they don't really have any way to kind of control the battlefield besides making people not take turns through either Tasha's or using the mocking word that gives them disadvantage. Otherwise, they don't really have a lot of stuff to control the battlefield. But we looked very early at a creature that does have a lot of that. So if I wanted to do this and I wanted to make it a tougher fight, what I could do is be like, oh, we are going to throw this guy in here. We're going to get rid of our... No! No, it's not going to let me do that. Okay. Anyway, let's do it this way. Rather than having me try to click that thing 60 times. Alright. We've got our Devastator. So remember, our Devastator is low, so if we wanted to bump this up and make it a more difficult combat, we could very much do that. If we wanted to add some skirmishers, like I said, our basic goblins are very skirmisher adjacent. Now, we put in a whole bunch, so I might not put... If I wanted to kick it up just to moderate, I'd be like 8 on 1. So that is going to, that kind of puts our stuff in a weird, right? We're not paying attention as much to our balance of odds and or action economy. So that might be kind of a little high on action economy. Goblins only get 1 attack and Devastator only gets 1 attack. So actually action economy wise, we're actually 1 less, because that only, or 2 less, because that's actually a 9 action economy instead of a 11. So action economy wise, we're still kind of heavy, but we could always put these goblins in 2 rounds. So it might be 4, and then a reinforcement round of another 4 that kind of come in later, maybe in round 2 or 3, if the combat's run a little bit long. We want to kind of pepper it up. But we can also be like, maybe not goblins. Maybe goblins are a little bit too low CR. Maybe we'll do, let's do these Iron Shadows. These guys are kind of like monks. So this would feel very deadly. Okay, so those are too high. So maybe we do some, maybe we do Bugbears instead. There we go. This would be a moderate encounter. This is going to be probably a pretty tough fight. We mix that. So we've got our Devastator, who is our caster. That's going to be our controller. So let's look at the ways they can kind of control things. They got a bunch of AoE stuff. So they've got Fireball. They've got Lightning Bolt. They also have Gust of Wind, which allows us some stuff that we can kind of push some people around. That's some good battlefield movement. Also got fog cloud that makes things really difficult for a lot of creatures. If we had, well, no, I'm not gonna say that. If we wanted to add some verticality to the battlefield, this is a good way to do that. And put our bad guys up, maybe 10 feet up. And fog cloud goes 20 feet though. We can just cut off some areas of things, which makes things nice. So we can pretty much, we can position fog cloud so if somebody doesn't want to fight in the fog cloud, they have to fight in an area which is not going to be conducive. A spot that will be very favorable terrain to the bad guys. Might be in a corner, might be a choke point in a doorway or something, who knows. We use the fog cloud to force them to reposition themselves. They also have this Army Arcana thing where they can just throw stuff like fireballs into the melee. With the bugbears are going to be melee most of the time, but can throw it on top of all their bugbears and not have to worry about their bugbears taking damage. They want to, which is really great. Plus they have that hard, real tough, devastating bolt right out the gate. This would be a very tough encounter. Even though by the numbers, it should be a moderate encounter, it's going to be a tough encounter for some 4th level PCs, because the bugbears are pretty beefy. Now, we also have to look at the bugbears and what they do, because they also, I think, it's I'm looking at the wrong thing. So you might be asking, like, this is one of the weird ones, like, why is the bugbear warrior use a light hammer of all things? What a weird thing. That would be definitely one of the first things that I just swap out and be like, why don't you have a real weapon? So they do 3d4 when they hit. And they get advantage when they grapple things. So they want to grab people and hold them. So this is actually a good thing you can use that fog cloud on. Drop the fog cloud. They run in and they grab PCs, which will, because they have advantage once they grab somebody, that will negate the disadvantage from the fog cloud to hit people in melee. And your Devastator can just be like, yeah, I'm just going to throw fireballs into or lightning bolts into the fog cloud. I don't need to see target creatures with AoE. And I can use my special ability so I know the bugbears won't get hurt when they're doing it. That immediately, that's going to be a kill box for your PCs. That'll kill PCs. Because they're going to have disadvantage on their dexterity saving throws because they can't see the things that are coming at them until they get hit by it. So they're going to have disadvantage on that. Their bugbears aren't going to be hit by these big AoEs. And they're going to have to get out of there, and they're going to have to ungrapple themselves to even try to get to the Devastator, figure out where they are. And if the Devastator's also hiding, do they have a decent stealth? Probably not. No. They only have a +1 to stealth. I can give them some cover and put them somewhere they want to be. What is going on with this quarterstaff? Sorry, I got distracted. When you hit him, they do 1d6 bludgeoning damage or 1d8 bludgeoning damage if used with 2 hands plus 3d8 force damage. What is the force damage coming from? What is that going? What the heck is that all about? This is unclear. Okay, and because of the comma, okay, so the force damage always happens regardless of whether you're using 1 hand or 2 hand. Interesting. That's a lot of damage. I don't know why they didn't make it all force damage or all bashing damage. I don't know why we set it up this way. But we did. Some of the 2025 stuff I'm still trying to wrap my head around. Some of these monsters are very weird. Anyways, but yeah, that is caster and skirmishers. So if I was going to do that, we'd have our hobgoblin, Devastator, which is our caster, and plus like 3 bugbears. And that's going to be a really tough fight too. It's, by the math, that's going to be moderate, but if we use them in any sort of synergy, that will be very, very difficult fight. You're like, okay, once you know the synergy, like how they add, just add a note in the stat blocks before you run it. Be like, okay, when these guys go in, this is what they're trying to do. They're going to try to grapple the guys in the fog cloud where they won't, and use the advantage to just give them straight rolls to hit people. While all the PCs have disadvantage on rolls in there, can't target things outside of the fog cloud. They have functionally the blinded condition, can't see things. For range, which puts our wizard and potentially our rogue at disadvantage, even our cleric at disadvantage. And then we have our devastator in the back who can throw things into the fog cloud and not have to worry about smoking their own allies in there, because they have that very specific power. So yeah, you read the stat blocks, you see, now you understand, okay, now I know what they're going to try to do in combat. I know what their tactics are going to be. And once you start using things like tactics and strategy, it changes the game completely. When you start looking at monsters and be like, oh, I put these monsters together, and this is how they work together. It's fun to do. I find it fun to do. You just kind of look at them and be like, okay, they're trying to grapple these people. What else can I do with grapple? Well, with grapple, they can't move, so if I drop the fog cloud on them, they can't move out of the fog cloud, which is bad for them. But the bugbears get advantage, so then they would be only down to just swinging regularly, versus the PCs who will have disadvantage to attack all the bugbears in the fog cloud. And then I don't have to worry about targeting my own allies with AoEs, so I can drop AoEs, and there's not a lot of negatives to not being able to see your target with AoEs. Especially when you have a general idea of where they're going to be. So yeah, and that's going to be a killer combat. You're going to probably kill PCs in that combat. All right, commander and troops. That's our next one. All right, so if I wanted to make commander and troops, so we need somebody who's like a leader, plus our troops. So we basically get a leader plus some sort of troops. That's usually going to be. We'll just put troops in here because that can be like skirmishers, that can be soldiers. It doesn't really matter. Plus, we'll just use mooks. And then sometimes there we go. Sometimes you're going to add artillery on top of that if you have enough budget. Once you start throwing, that would be 3 different types of monsters that kind of fits within our frame. It's going to kind of depend on how many you throw in there. All right, so what would that look like if we wanted to do a commander and troop setup? So we know what this is going to look like, so we're going to go ahead and out of here. Our commander and troops, let's try this for her commander and troops. We have this is a good guy to use, so we're going to use Hobgoblin Captain. Anybody that's going to have like Captain, Chief, Warlord, something like that in their name will be a leader type of character. That they clue you in with that naming. So we're going to have a Hobgoblin Captain. I think that they're going to have with them some bugbears. Bugbears are good, just like mook kind of guys. They hit hard, they do their thing. Get some bugbears in there, and if I wanted to just do it this way, I mean, again, the encounter math's all wonky, but we could probably get away with 4 of these guys. So 1 Hobgoblin Captain. Let's see what the Hobgoblin Captain does. We'll find out sort of the things. Okay, they've got that Aura of Authority, so 10-foot emanation off of them. So weird. So that's like a 25-foot square. Originating from the Hobgoblin. Oh, right. They all have advantage on attack rolls and saving throws. This is going to make those bugbears really deadly. So in the new 2025, they split up bugbears from bugbear used to be 1 entry, now it's 2 entries. There's the warrior, which is just kind of the standard bugbear, but there's also now the stalker. So the stalker is a little bit more sneak focused, I'd say. They're going to drop in, they're going to grab some things. They got a bunch of hit points. They're going to do that multi-attack. The thing that you want to pay attention to here is they've got this abduct thing. So they have the ability to grab things. They've got the quick grapple as a bonus action. They can quickly grab a thing. They do... they get advantage automatically, even though they don't need it from the Hobgoblin commander if they're within the aura. They can grab them and start moving them. So they want to maybe grab them and always keep them within the Hobgoblin captain's aura. Or grapple them, and then that would be a very easy thing to do. That very much kind of ties us up. We could potentially, if we wanted to, we could maybe like drop one of these, and we can get maybe, I'd probably like throw this guy back in here. Or I could also add the Nilbog too. Like I said, add that artillery aspect. So instead of, because the Bugbear only have javelins, so they're not really great, but we could use the Goblin Boss who sits in the back and maybe just fires off a couple of shots. Now, this Hobgoblin Captain, I think, has multi-attack, right? This is going to be, again, by the book, moderate encounter. But Hobgoblin Captain has multi-attack. Bugbears have multi-attack. Goblin Boss has multi-attack. You have 5 things on the field that have multi-attack. You're doing 10 attack actions versus the 4 pieces that are going to get. So you do have to be careful. While we're not doubling up the odds, they are going to be very tough. Now, if you're keying in on the strategy, that Goblin Boss is absolutely going to be sitting in the back trying to get some cover behind stuff, only going to pop out to shoot at people. That's all they're doing, is they're popping out to shoot people. And they're just going to plink away at them. They're not going to do a bunch of damage, but they're always going to be a consistent nuisance. I will tell you about probably one of the... I was going to say funniest. Funniest, and maybe not... One of the, like... Not even strange. It's just like it was a TPK at the end, and you go, huh? That was 100% avoidable, and the PC's just like kind of let it happen to him. So I set up this. This was in 4th edition. So I set up this combat that was taking place in like a marketplace, and the PCs are fighting the big ogre. There's a big ogre, so there's a big brute there. Got a bunch of hit points, soaks up a bunch of damage. That's his thing. And then a bunch of just like goblin shooters, just goblins with short bows that were like on top of like stalls and roofs and stuff like that. There's like 5 of them, I think, 4 or 5 of them. And they're just out of the way, just plinking arrows. I think they were minions. I think they just do straight damage. They just do straight damage. So there's no rolling. I think every time they hit, they do like 4 points of damage or something like that. Of note, 4E has more hit points than 5E does. So keep that in mind. Party, this is where I talked about the party see the large thing, the large monster on the battlefield, and they're like, oh, obviously we can focus fire on the ogre. Well, the ogre is literally only there from the DM side, like behind the screen. The only point that's there is to soak up hit points. The real damage there is done by the minions, who the players don't ever attack. They only focus on the ogre, and then they all end up getting killed because the archers just plucked at them. I rolled well. They kept getting hit, and they went down. The ogre did damage, but that damage came from the minions who were just sitting there, and the PCs just were standing in the open, just letting themselves get peppered with arrows round after round after round. And then all ended up going down. It was like, yeah, it's gonna happen. You guys did nothing to mitigate any of that. You guys let those archers just wear you out. That's what we talk about, sort of like mixing up monsters and mixing up creatures. Because now you have something that's in the range. You've got your massive aura emanation, so they do not have to get very close to the Hobgoblin Captain for the Bugbears to get that advantage. And then on top of that, once they grapple things, they're already going to have advantage on it. So it's always like them grabbing them and pulling them closer. Now we could do something different and like hit them with the Nilbog. If I didn't want to do the Goblin Boss, that's also a CR1, that would also work. I could also just throw some cheap goblins in there. So if I didn't want to do a Goblin Boss, I could just throw 2 goblins in there instead. If I wanted to keep it, the action and common be equitable. Be like, oh, there's just like 2 goblins on other sides of the rims with their short bows just popping out of cover, taking some pot shots. Generally aren't going to hit. They don't have great to hit, but especially against 4th level party, but they'll do some damage occasionally. And if nothing else, the wizard will waste a turn turning around and dropping an AoE on them behind cover so they can attack them, kill them. So, yeah, and it's pretty straightforward. So if we want to do that, so that's commander and troops. So that would be our hobgoblin, captain, plus what did we do? Three bugbears, right? Because hobgoblin captain is technically a lower CR. 3 of those, and then yeah, we'll do like 2 goblins. We'll do that. Goblin. Do that. So goblins, but they're only going to be used as archers. They literally only sit back and kind of plink at people. Very difficult combat. You've got different stuff that's kind of going on in the combat. And at some point, somebody's going to get tired of being shot with the goblin. These goblin archers are a great way to really, ideally, so here's the thing. This is why strategy is really important. Hobgoblins are incredibly warlike, and they're all very disciplined, which means that they're going to be prepped and prepared to deal with adventurers. Primarily, they're the kind of monster that knows specifically, hey, you need to take out clerics and wizards first. You need to take out the spellcasters first. And not worry about the other people. Like, take out these ones because these represent the biggest, like, flare of damage or buffs or debuffs that can be put on you. So having the hobgoblin walk in and be like, see the wizard and, like, point at it and look at the bugbears and be like, grab that guy and bring him to me. And then the bugbears all charge off and use a grapple attack and literally just drag the wizard into the aura and start wailing on the wizard. And letting the archers take care of things like wizards and clerics and people with low AC who maybe generally stand in the back and maybe don't get attacked a lot because maybe the fighter does a really, or barbarian, whoever it is in your party, that does a really good job of like holding the front line. So it's really great to hit people in the back who are very much glass cannons. You can just have the archers pick at them. And they're more likely to turn their attention from what's going on to those archers because they're not used to things hitting them in combat. And so they'll waste a turn to take care of a CR 1/4 goblin who's off by itself, and they might waste an AoE spell on it, like a leveled spell on taking care of that creature. And that's just resource management, baby. That's just playing the game. So these are the sort of things you start to think of as a DM as you get more experience in it. All that sort of stuff. So Dragon Center solo. Yeah, solos. So, I mean, we know that the one that they kind of showed us already was the Devastator. Though the Devastator, I would definitely look at, like, if I was going to do a solo with these guys, the Devastator's not going to be enough. We looked at that as a... You would have to push it up and do the Warlord. Now the problem is that the Warlord is a beast. If you thought the Hobgoblin Captain was bad, this guy's even worse. And he's CR6, which means that he's crossing that threshold between adventure tiers, which makes him... Because this guy gets 3 attacks, I think, right? Yeah, so he has the same Aura of Authority. He gets the multi-tag. Though if he's fighting by himself, the Aura of Authority doesn't really do anything. It gives him advantage on everything, though, which makes this guy nasty. This guy is not a guy you want to fight. This guy is going to rip through a 4th level adventuring party. Unless they can lock him down real quick. But since you have to remember... You have to be very specific when you're reading the traits, or else it's very easy to forget as Dungeon Master to read this. If I saw this originally and I didn't read the full thing, I'd think like, oh, his allies get advantage. That's what he does. It's like, no. The Hobgoblin. Don't miss that part. The Hobgoblin and its allies. Which means that whenever this guy's on the battlefield, he always has advantage on all attacks and all saving throws as long as he is not incapacitated. And there's not a lot of things that PCs can do, especially at 4th level, to incapacitate it. NPC. They're not going to be able to use sleep on this guy. He's got way too many hit points. And he's got advantage on all the saves. So he's not probably going down. And his saves are good. And his AC is 20. And this guy is going to rip through your dude. Through your people. He's going to have those 3 attacks. He's going to do 68 plus 3. His 2 hits, good, plus 6. He's going to hit a lot. He also gets that parry. Very nice. So this guy, throwing this guy as a solo would be really difficult at the party already. Plus, you should be building in things like the legendary resistances. And if you're going to do a solo monster, you got to add those in to give them an option. Now, the only other thing that I would discuss about doing, and this is more of a getting into very much homebrew territory, and much more like you really need to be confident in the math and your knowledge of the game to do stuff like that, is I'll break these out and I'll be like, I'm going to give them different initiatives. He has, if he's fighting 4 PCs, he's going to get 4 attacks just to keep the action economy the same. And so he'll just have an action ability to basically make an attack or move in between every character's go. So basically, we're going to roll initiative, and then he's going to have a slot in between each PC that he's facing, starting at whatever I actually roll for his initiative. So you might get the first 2 rounds if he's in the middle of the first. If he's in the middle of the initiative, the first 2 people are going to go off, then he'll go, and then the PC goes, then he goes, then the PC goes, then he goes, then the PC goes, then he goes. Just swapping it in. And basically, I just give him an action. He can either move, or he can attack. He has some sort of action he can do. So he can take a dash action if he wants to and just move. He can take a disengaged action if he's in a place he doesn't want to be in, and then at every one of those initiatives he gets the ability to save out of any effect, because that's one of the things I don't like legendary resistances, and just to be like, oh, your spell just doesn't, you just can't get spells off on him until the 3rd round of combat. That doesn't feel like a lot of fun to me. It doesn't feel fun to play a spellcaster where like I can't really actually use any of my powerful spells because he'll just hand wave them away until like round 3 of combat. I don't think that that's good, fun game design. That's a personal thing. That's just how I feel it. So rather, I'd just be like, he's just going to have a lot more opportunities to save out of stuff. Plus, he's already got advantage on all the saves anyways. He's gonna get out of whatever save. If you hit him with Tasha's Hideous Laughter, he's gonna save. Like, sure, one PC's gonna come in and be able to get that nice hit on him while he's prone. And do a bunch of damage to him, but then after that he's going to have advantage, and he's going to make that charisma save. It's Tasha's wisdom, right? He's going to make that wisdom save with advantage of the +3. He's going to make that for a 4th level caster, probably DC 15. Yeah, he'll get out of that, no problem. Not worried about it. So yeah, you need to you have our Hobgoblin plus layer / parry actions. Yeah. So really, because the way that solos are set up in 5e in 2024, and they have legendary actions and layer actions and stuff like that, you really want to save these to be like the kind of like climax of whatever your adventure is. You generally don't want to do these as sort of like a middle of the adventure kind of attack. Even though you can do plenty of solo combats, like especially in 4E, what a lot of this stuff was designed for. It was not uncommon to have a solo fight in the middle of the adventure and not have it be the big bad. It'd be like, oh, you kick in the door and there's an owlbear in there, and then you fight the owlbear, and that's a solo encounter, and then you move on to the rest of whatever you were doing. Because usually solo monsters, just like they are in 5e in 2024, not particularly powerful unless you really ratchet them up. Or pick something that's like way over leveled for your PCs, like a Hobgoblin Warlord. So actually, this is generally one of those circumstances where I'm like, don't fight solo monsters. Solo monsters don't work very well without a bunch of work to make them, a bunch of workarounds to make them work out. So instead I might do something like, oh yeah, this was a fun one. So it's like, all right, well, we're kind of limited here on our stat blocks, right? There are only so many. We basically had to use the Hobgoblin Warlord because there was nothing else to use here. I was like, but what if we went over to the ogres again? What if we use this guy? The ogre battering ram. Well, it's a lower one. That kind of puts us in the Devastator. Obviously, an ogre is going to have a lot more beefy. They're going to stick around for a much longer time. We can look that up. Ogre battering ram. There we go. This guy, 76 hit points, good. AC 11, very brutish, right? Easy to hit, lots of hit points. Dark Vision, Siege Monster. The Ogre deals double damage against objects and structures as the Battering Ram Ogre. Has multi-attack, so it gets 2 bash attacks. So if you do it as a solo creature, it's going to have less attacks than the player characters. That's not good for a round, so we need to bump up that action economy somehow. So a classic example would be like, hey, you're going to fight a 1, 2, which will be a much more difficult one. But it also puts us in our high difficulty, even though I think a party of 4th level adventurers could probably handle 2 Ogre Battering Rams. I don't think that would actually be a very difficult fight. Now when they hit, they do 2d10 plus 4, so it's going to be big ouchies when they hit. And the ogres can push the target 5 feet away if the target is huge or smaller. Oh, that's interesting. This is one of the few creatures that can actually, without disadvantage, push something that is larger than them. That's fun. That would be a fun thing to remember. Also be maybe a fun thing to get the PCs on their side and then have them fight a huge monster and have the friendly ogre battering ram be able to kind of position them around. That'd be fun too. The ogre also basically has Sentinel. So when a creature enters a space within 5 feet of the ogre makes a bash attack against the creature. If the attack hits, the target speed is reduced to 0 until the start of the ogre's next turn. They essentially have Sentinel. More or less. So, like, this is good, but this by itself wouldn't be enough. Throwing 2 at it tells me it's high. As far as it's like a high XP difficulty. I don't think it would actually be difficulty, but we're going to try to follow the encounter guidelines as well as we can, because that's a thing that comes with experience. So if you're a newer DM and you're looking at that, you might not want to follow that. So what are some things that we could do? Well, I would think you can give them the layer actions. It'll be helpful in ways. In legendary actions, give them the ability to do some attacks and stuff like that. But I also think this would be a setup where you do actually add some extra guys in here. Let's go back to our goblins. We're going to take this back down to 1. So if we wanted to make some adds, so this is when things were in 4E, you would use things like the minions that are just like fodder to fill in. They have 1 hit point, they're not there to hang out a lot. So we might throw some goblins in there, or even maybe some hobgoblins if we want somebody who's a little bit tougher. Because we don't want to end up with like 60 goblins, right? So we might do something that's maybe some hobgoblins. We'll do like half a dozen hobgoblins. The 6 hobgoblins, that's not nothing. Like, that's still going to be a tough fight. But I do like, let's go with goblins. I want to do like, I like 3 goblins. An ogre's big. This guy is supposed to be like a siege engine. So with those constraints and that thought process, we'd be like, okay, we're gonna do our ogre battering ram. We're gonna be like, why not treat it like a war elephant? There's like a thing on his back that these goblins, a platform these goblins can stand for, and we're gonna put some goblin archers on the back, maybe 3 of them. And this thing will run around and they'll shoot from up there, and they can try to climb up there and deal with them if they want to. We'll do it Dragon's Dogma style, where you can climb on the enemy and get up there maybe. And then you have the very, very Cave Troll Lord of the Rings thing where they're like, he's on my back, kind of stuff. So we can do that. I like that. And we can always have reinforcement goblins. There can always be more goblins. There's always more goblins in the dungeon. We don't have to worry about that, especially like these low-level moop goblins. They're just all over the place. So much that a level 4 party's not really trying to kill probably every goblin they see. A goblin sees them and then they scurry away into the darkness. But they could join, and then, right, they can make morale checks and run away and run back in. Be very chaotic, classic goblin, cowardly, chaotic. Running in, they make some attacks, they run away and screaming. They run in, they make some attacks, they run away screaming, and it's just like a bunch of different goblins showing up all the time. So maybe do a reinforcement at the end of the round to see how many, like maybe 1d3 plus 1 more goblin shows up every round until the battering ram's like fully dead. until they take it out. Now, this would also be a place where I'd look at. We're gonna do the what's this guy? Ogre Battering Ram. And this is the thing where it's like, this is something, because we have, that's why it's important to look at the stat block. We have this aspect, the siege monster. This is the thing that I want to pull into. They have a thing that keeps people from moving, which is really fun. And they have a thing that allows them to deal double damage to objects and structures. This thing is already a large creature, so it's already, you know, takes up 10 plus feet, has 15 feet of reach. Like, I'm thinking about, what if we make this room, maybe it's got water in it. Not enough water that it becomes difficult terrain for the ogre, but would definitely be difficult terrain for the player characters. I like that. But I also want to use the siege monster thing. So that already gives them the ogre a advantage as far as movement's going. They're already faster, they've got a speed of 40 already, and then if everybody else is essentially slowed to 20 feet, they now have double speed over everybody, which means it's going to be really hard to run away from this guy. He can, if anybody even takes a dash action, he'll be able to chase them down and still be able to attack them in one round, which is really great. Means this guy's hard to get away from and he hits hard. And can push them. And when he hits people, he can stop them from moving. He can reduce their speed to 0. So let's take it one step further if we want to use the environment. Okay. And this will get a little bit, we'll talk more about this next time when we talk about it. But I do want to talk about this because this is very much a battlefield kind of aspect, our battlefield environment thing. Like, okay, how do we create an environment in which the environment helps this creature? So I'm thinking the water, right? The water helps. Now he's got a distinct advantage over them because of the terrain. And now I want to add in, what if they had like a stilted like piers? Like maybe there's actually walkways. Actually, the entrance and exit from this room aren't on the ground floor. They're actually raised up. Maybe there's like these 10-foot rickety stilt walkways that are up there. And maybe, I don't know, like a H kind of pattern. Yeah, maybe like an H kind of pattern or something like that. Maybe it's like a little maze of them. Maybe this is like a central room where there's maybe like 2 or 3 different ways to kind of go in the rooms. There's different ways you might want to run around the room. And then, so this creature has the ability to deal double damage to objects and structures. So what it does is that the player characters start out on the causeways, running around up here. And the ogre's down here. And so the ogre, sometimes rather than attacking them, will try to corner them and like crush parts of the walkway. And if they fall off the walkway, they're going to take like probably 15 feet. So they're going to take at least a D6. Maybe I'll make it 2D6. We'll see. Depending on how high it is. I think 2D6 would be all right too for a 4th level party. 2d6 points of falling damage as they fall into the water, thrown into the water. As it does that, and it can kind of connect them, and then maybe they have to run, trying to choose which doorway they want to run out of, but they don't know what's there because they haven't had time to investigate the different passageways. Now we've got a very complex encounter where you're able to use all the monster's traits. They have this way they can hit a creature and keep the creature from running on the causeway, which is really nice. They can destroy parts of the causeway by doing this double damage. And this is the thing that's like, when I'm running the character, I let them know this. It's like, oh, this creature has this trait where it does, called Siege Monster, where it deals double damage to objects and structures. So it's able to just obliterate these walkways. Because it's already doing 2d10 plus 4 damage, so average 15 damage. So it's doing average 30 damage to these causeways when it hits. So I think that's pretty good. You might just be like, every 5-foot section of causeway has 20 hit points. That's enough that it's like the players would have a difficult time without spending some limited resources, maybe doing that damage in one round. But this guy's very easily probably going to be able to hit that most of the time. Because he's on average going to be doing 30 points of damage. And that's the cool thing, is he has multi-attack, which means that he can do that thing where he can bash out 5 feet of that stilted causeway and then turn around with his second attack and attack one of the PCs. He can attack one of the PCs, and because of his thing, he can push that target off the causeway into the water. So he doesn't even have to destroy it. And if he tries to do that to something like the fighter, if he just hits the fighter and puts the fighter on the ground, now the fighter can't protect the other people on the causeway. Much more interesting combat. All those things, you can be like the fighter, you see your friends are all exposed, you're the only one that's got heavy armor on, and this thing's kind of taking you, not out of the fight, but out of your ability to protect these people. So, easy to make fights. Perfect. Done. And that's when you start using the environment. Like I said, we're going to talk more about that next time, but you can say just changing the environment completely changes how the fight goes. This is an incredibly different fight than just having the ogre battering ram stand in a room by itself, even with some goblins that ride on its back. That, very boring. One AoE spell can take out all the goblins on its back and do some damage to the battering ram, and then everybody else just swarms over this creature and takes care of it. You're not using it to its fullest extent. You look at its traits and be like, okay, what is a good situation I can put this creature in that gives it the advantage? And then figure out create a room that facilitates that, essentially. Because again, for most combat encounters, 80% of the time your monsters should have the home field advantage. They should be fighting in in an area that is conducive to the way they fight, both with their tactics, how they deal with other people who are in their party, as well as the environment in which they choose to fight in. Sort of things when you look at things like, what's a good one? Bullywugs, which are one of my favorite enemies. This is, I know, random example, but like I said, we'll talk about this more next time. I just love talking about this stuff. So the Bullywugs, one of the things that they can do, bonus action leap, they can leap up to 30 feet by spending 10 feet of movement. So you need to be throwing them in a combat arena in which they can make use of that leap. Like that's useful for them. Maybe it's islands in the marsh that they can easily jump between. If they can jump 30 feet by spending 10 feet of movement, they can easily jump to another island, where that would be very difficult for party members who have to like wade and or swim between these different islands within the swamp. But they also have a swim speed, so actually being in the water and fighting, I don't think hurts them that much. But if you wanted to give them trees where they could hide and stuff like that, because they do have a stealth bonus, you could throw them like that. They hop up into trees and stuff, and they're able to. These ones, Bullywugs, don't have a. This Bullywug Warrior in 2025 does not have any ranged weapons, which is always a misfire on my end. It's like if you're going to give them, there's a problem, and maybe I'd have to look at the new stat block in the monster manual, but they don't give gear for this thing, even though this creature clearly is humanoid and clearly uses a rapier, which is a piece of gear. So there's no reason why they wouldn't have a sling or a short bow or blow darts with poison on it. You can do all that sort of stuff just by swapping out their gear. Blow darts with poison that can do the poison condition is a really great way to turn the tide of battle on a low-level party when you give them disadvantage on attacks really easily. Might give them some reason to talk with frogs and toads. That might be a thing, like you use some giant frogs or giant toads stat blocks in this encounter and mix them with that. That makes sense, and they're able to communicate with them. Maybe they ride on them too. You can do all sorts of cool stuff. But like I said, that's a little bit beyond the purview of what we're talking. That'll be our next time. Next time we'll talk about this. So, that's our ogre battle. Right, we talked about the environment. So, there's going to be like a... We'll have our rickety built causeways, and Could just be one, but I would think you want multiple so that it's kind of a maze with them running around. Assuming that even the players get through, the PCs are successful, they get through this encounter, they kill the ogres, all the goblins flee, and they're left to their own devices. More than likely, they are all going to be in the water. Or, at least most of them will probably be in the water. And like I said, all the entrances and exits out of this room are like 20 feet up. Now they've got to figure out how to get up there. If the ogre was successful in destroying all the causeways, there's not like a ladder or anything like that. So they're going to have to climb up. Now it becomes like a fun little like non-combat encounter thing as they try to figure out how to get up there. Or they pull out their rope and throw it up there, or maybe somebody's got a scroll to jump and they jump up there with the rope and tie it off and help people get up there. And anytime that they do something like that, that's an opportunity for you to then roll for a random encounter to see. As they do that, and there's like, oh, now you hear that there's a flurry of footsteps echoing in your direction from one of the other passageways. It seems like more goblins are headed in your direction, and they'll probably be like, okay, we need to hurry up and move out there. And then there's your tension, and then people are running, and then these monsters not necessarily catch up with them. And that's a good way to stop party from being like, oh, we had this combat encounter, and now we're going to take a short rest here. It's like, guys, you can't sit for an hour in the middle of this big room in the middle of the dungeon. Like, the likelihood that somebody's going to find you just had a big fight. Like, people are going to, and a lot of those guys ran away. Like, people are going to know that the monsters are coming, that you are here. You made a bunch of noise, you killed a bunch of people, but a bunch of people also ran off to alarm other people. They're going to know you're here. They're going to run in. A flurry of footsteps. They have a monk. Yeah. Yep. It's all hobgoblin iron shadows that are coming to fight you. Exactly. So, right. The goblins went and got more powerful goblins to come fight you. We should not hang out here. We should keep moving. So we wanted our rickety silk causeway, and we wanted our waiting water. If I was extra mean, I might make it stagnant water, and maybe we throw some disease stuff in there, but that was extra cruel at this point. This will already be a very difficult encounter that I've drafted up here in a few minutes. I don't need to be also throwing, like, filth fever into it. I could, if I wanted to, if I needed to make it more difficult, but I'm probably not going to do that. Alright, so double line. What is double line? Double line is basically front line, back line. Backline. And just do this. This can be basically you have what they would call in 4E brutes and soldiers. And in the backline you're gonna have artillery. Basically anybody who's ranged. Basically this is where double line is just melee and ranged. I'll just put it that way. This is very much like if you are familiar with any sort of like organized team sports, you're going to be probably very familiar with double line. This is like American football, offensive, defensive linemen, and then people who are in the backfield in the line of scrimmage. So very, very similar things. So you're going to have people who are out doing stuff, and that's kind of your ranged components, and the ones who are crushing up against each other, and that's your melee component. We're moving stuff around. And what's really happening is that everybody's trying to get through that first line to get to the back line. It's generally how that works. It's trying to get, I know we're going to use sports stuff. I know, sue me. We're going to use, like, linebackers are trying to get to the line of scrimmage so they can get to the QB and halfbacks. The running backs. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to get back there into the backfield. So they're trying to create openings, and at the same time, the offensive line of scrimmage right there also trying to create openings, but so that maybe their halfback can get through and run for yardage up the middle. All right, that's done. We're not going to do any more sports stuff. That was all the sports stuff, I promise. Let's see. Sorry, I just have notes written down because I looked at these already, so I wouldn't have to spend time trying to build them off the top of my head. So for double line, I went bugbears and nilbogs for goblin bosses. So very similar to what we had already kind of built out. So if I wanted to do this, I could do, I could even bump it up. I could do Iron Shadows. I could do like 3 Iron Shadows, and then in the back have like, yeah, maybe like 1 Nilbog in the back, which is a little close to. Actually, we'll drop these. That's not going to give us enough guys. We should have. Generally, I like more front lines than backline fighters. Fighters as in combatants, not fighters as in soldiers or the class fighter. So that might be a thing. You could actually just build this with nothing but goblin bosses. Okay. This is a perfectly good example. Goblin boss low. 4 guys are going to stand in the front with their shields and scimitars. 3 of them are going to sit in the back with their short bows. Perfect. Done. Like I said, it's better to use 2 stat blocks though, so we'll add bugbears. So I'd do something like that. There'll be bugbears in the front and goblin bosses in the back. I could even drop them down. I could add some if I wanted to be like, oh, well, maybe I want more guys in the front. Though that's already 7 combatants. That's pretty... Like I said, if you start hitting 8+ combatants, things start to get real wonky real quick. And this is actually going to be a deceptively difficult... Could be a deceptively difficult encounter because I believe bugbears also have multi-attack. Let me double check. And this would be the bugbear warrior. They do not have multi-attack. So they would be able to. So that would be 4 attacks from them, and then each of the goblin bosses does have multi-attack, so they get 2. So that would be 10 attacks. So that kind of keeps us in general with what we've seen as far as building these encounters. Is that they're going to get about 10 attacks to 4 attacks from the PCs. So again, the action economy. If you're wanting to keep things even equal once you start getting up into the higher levels because of multi-attacks, once you get around the barrier, that transition point between adventuring tiers, right? We're making level 4, and that actually makes this more difficult than maybe doing level 3 characters. Is by making them a 4th level party means that we really want to often bring in stuff that is maybe a little bit more. You're going to have more creatures that have things like multi-attacks. And that's really something that's really starts in those 5 through 10 levels. So having a 4th level party is actually sometimes really, really difficult to balance around sometimes. Because even like this seems like it should be a probably pretty straightforward thing. None of these, and probably will be because none of these are going to have like, other than stealth, they don't have any traits that kind of work off of one another. The goblin bosses have their ability to like swap out with each other, but if they're all in ranged, if we're setting them all back in archer things, they're not going to stand next to each other because we don't want them to get smoked, get our entire group of artillery smoked by one AoE spell. Because somewhere earlier in the dungeon, the wizard picked up a scroll of fireball, and now they're going to drop a fireball on them and pretty much roast these goblin chiefs. So we're not going to do that. But it's a pretty standard example, so we're going to have 4 bugbears. Plus 3 goblin bosses. And they're going to be in archer mode. Same way I did with the goblins. Sometimes I'll leave that and be like, these guys are primarily going to use their bows. That's what they're here for. So the bugbears are there too. The bugbears do really great because they have the ability to grab people and move them. So that means if PCs start getting close to the goblin bosses who are using their bows, they can grab them and pull them away. Because they're able to grab them and they don't spend extra movement to move a creature once they grapple them. Which means like if a rogue runs up to him, that bugbear can go grab that rogue and start pulling them back as their grab attack. And start moving them away. And then they're grappled with speed 0. So they escape. So again, already building in tactics for it. But very straightforward one. The bugbear's entire job of the front line is to keep the guys off the back line. The entire job of the back line is pretty much to kill people. That's pretty much their goal, and to stay out of melee. That's generally what they're doing. So they're going to be running around. They're going to be agile. They're going to move. They're going to use that goblin quickness to be able to disengage and move away and take shots and stay on the move and not get pinned down, while the bugbears grab people and move them around the battlefield and make sure they don't start doubling up on the goblin bosses. And then, of course, the goblin bosses do have melee weapons, so if the spider ends up cornering one, or like maybe you have a battle cleric that's cornered one of the goblin bosses, they can, of course, drop their bow and pull out their sword and shield and get into melee. And they still have multi-attack. They'll still be a thing to deal with that 17 AC, some hit points, and the ability to do 2 attacks per turn. They're no slouches, what we'll put that. They're acting as though they are weak, but they are actually not that weak if you get them on one-on-one. And then the Wolfpack or Horde. And this is the thing that, this is why I didn't use nothing, only Goblin bosses, because Goblin bosses would be better used here. Or you can just be like, I throw 10 Goblin bosses at them. And though that's a very high one. But it could be like, oh, I'm going to throw 7 Goblin bosses at them. So it's just a horde of enemies. Generally, you want to do this with some lower level enemies, though. But you have to be very careful about the action economy and groupings, because that's when it gets out of control. So 7's about the max you want to do. Unless you really want to go over it. Like, we could throw up like 60 goblins at them, but let's not do that. How many hobgoblins could we throw at them? At least by the math. Okay. So we can throw almost 30 hobgoblins at them, which is way too many enemies. So we're not going to do that. We could also throw a bunch of bugbears at them. If we really wanted to. That would probably be the more appropriate thing, to just run into a whole mess of bugbears. Throw in 7 bugbears at them. And here, again, you could do that, and then at the same time, using the rules, because one of the things they did do in 2024 that I do appreciate is that we're starting to re-specify things. So you have bugbear warriors and bugbear stalkers who are almost the same, but they do have slight differences. 4E did this a lot. You had like 7 different types of goblins. Some that shoot, some that are spellcasters, some that are melee, some that are heavy melee. All those sorts of things. So they all fit like different roles. So you had a lot more eclectic things. You can make a only goblinoid encounter in a dozen different ways, and it wouldn't be the same combat. And so we're trying to see some of that eke back out in 2024. So the difference between the stalker and this guy, pretty much the only difference is the stalker's got the quick grapple, which allows them to grab them very quickly, and I think they've got a better stealth. No, their stealth is exactly the same. They just don't have a light hammer, right? No. So the stalkers are actually going to hit harder. They also have survival of 3. They have survival 2. That's very different. I don't know what this warrior does. Comparatively. Oh, probably because these guys aren't the same. Okay. Boo-hoo on me. These are not the same level. This guy's a CR3. That's totally different. No wonder. Okay. So we'd only be using these guys. I hate those light hammers, though. They're for sure getting rid of these things. There's no reason they shouldn't be using a Morning Star and Javelin like the other ones do. Why would they be using light hammers? Why hammers at all? Why not axes? What a weird decision. Is there something about... oh, I didn't mean to do that. Is there something in here about the property of the light hammer that maybe they're using? Their mastery is Nick. When you make an extra attack of the light property, you can make it as part of the attack action. Okay, do we assume... This is one of the things that's kind of weird about 2024. Is the baseline assumption is that monsters using gear have mastery in the gear they're using? Unclear. Doesn't say yes or no. I assume that's where the extra D4 is coming from. I'm just going to say it. I'm pretty sure that's where the extra D4 of damage is coming in. Instead of being like you make a separate attack, that's why it's 3d4 damage instead. So 1d4 doubled would be 2d4, which would be pretty standard. That extra d4, I think, is coming from that offhand attack that's part of the major attack, the primary attack that we do now, because of the weapon properties, weapon masteries. That's going to be my assumption. I don't know why we can't just also have that as a secondary. I don't feel like that would add too much. It's like an extra line we could add in here. I think that would be useful. I think it's more useful than telling me in stat block the treasure they're going to have. I don't find that as useful. Interesting. But yeah, that is it. So we're kind of ending on the last one. So what we had 7 bugbears. And we'll go ahead and say the warriors. And again, I would probably change up their gear, because I think their gear is kind of meh. So yeah, the horde. Now, if you want to lean into horde, horde also means that there should be a lot of them. So that might be something where it's like the difficulty is the numbers we're dealing with. Like, that is the true difficulty of that. And that's where something we might use something that's a little lower CR and maybe go up to potentially double, or like 3 times as much. Maybe not quite 3 times as much, so not quite 12. So if I wanted to run a whole bunch of hobgoblins, I could be like, oh, there's 11 hobgoblins. Even better, I could do goblins. This is another one. So let's do this, because I did not put that in here. There's a thing that you can do. You can also swarmify. So let's do that. Let's do, so how many goblins could we get? 30 is a pretty good number. I like 30. I think that's right at moderate, correct? Yeah. Right at moderate. So if we assume that every grouping, if we wanted to do 4 little swarms, each group presumably has what, 7 to 8 goblins in it. And this would be the thing where I'd probably just make like a custom monster to create a goblin swarm, but you can swarmify just about anything. So let's say if we put in here, what would be a good swarm? We wanted something, if we wanted something that was a swarm, this is where we do something that's like a reskin. Okay, don't do that. Let's clear the encounter. So let's say we wanted to make a swarm of things, just to kind of like keep it. This is where we do like maybe a swarm of whippers. This is a bad example, but we could be like, oh, I want to do maybe like 7 swarms of quippers. But what we'll do is we'll go in with quippers. We'll basically open up the goblin stat block. Goblin. Yeah, goblin minion. Yeah, these are no, these guys are an 8th. I need something that's right, because old goblins are a quarter, I think. Right, yeah. Goblin War. So I'd take like these guys, and then I would kind of layer the swarm mechanics on top of them. Really, can't find quippers at all? Okay. Well, I don't know why I won't put them. Sometimes this does this. This is a 5e tools thing. It's like it's definitely there, but it's not searchable for some reason. So you give them the resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing. I'm going to make them larger than that. I'd probably make them large size, so you're probably going to want... this would be a very large encounter if you wanted to. So like a handful of large swarms that are coming after the creatures. Do stuff, they're immune to this kind of stuff. They have the blood frenzy. Obviously, we're not going to give them that. We are going to give them the swarm aspect, though. Once they occupy another creature's space and vice versa, the swarm can move through any opening large enough for a goblin, essentially. So through any sort of small size space. So they can all move through small size spaces. Can't regain hit points or gain temporary hit points. So that's essentially we would buff up their HP. You figure out what that HP would be. This is creating a custom monster, but swarmifying monsters doesn't really take too much work. Really give them the resistance stuff. Sometimes I give them vulnerability to area of attacks, area of effect spells, because a fireball I feel like should do a lot more damage to when you're a bunch of creatures representing the HP rather than one. That's just a me thing. I think that is an old 4E thing too as well, that I just like import over sometimes. Because swarms can be kind of a pain in the butt to fight unless you for any sort of like melee focused monsters. Because even if you have magic weapons, they still resist the magic weapons too. So they're a pain in the butt to damage for like half the party. Any of our non-casters. So yeah, I would just swarmify them. And so swarmify low launchers like goblins. We'll say standard goblins. If you did. Alright. Hey, what's going on? But yeah, I think that was it. That basically hits all our opposition. Like I said, we didn't get to the battlefield environment. We'll have to get to that next time. We are way long in the tooth for this one. So we're definitely not going over that now. So we're going to have to check in on that next time. So there's going to be a part 2 here. This time we only talked about we're making new D&D encounters to make tougher D&D encounters, combat encounters to whomp your players. We're only focusing on the opposition this time. First thing we want to check in with are the standard stuff. That's you want to make sure that you know the party's level, you are adjusting for that, and challenge ratings that match that. Making sure that you're staying within the adventure tiers for the most part. So if you have characters that are in those levels 1 through 4, you don't really want to be throwing them higher CR things like 5+ CRs, because they're built for characters that are supposed to be within that band. So the action economy gets weird. The 2 hits and damage math gets really wonky once you start to do that. So for the most part, you want to keep it pretty consistent within that. Now, as we talked about, that's generally in the action economy and the odds. So you really don't want to generally have twice as many monsters as the PCs or half as many monsters as the PCs, because that also throws off the stuff. So, and like I said, that's where most dungeon masters stop when they're thinking about coming up with their combats is, what levels what CR do I throw at and how many do I throw at, and make sure that I'm adjusting for the action economy. That's really kind of the beginning. That's like the absolutely fundamental base layer of stuff to look at. The most important one, I think, is that tactics and strategy, and it's the next one that we talked about. You got to review the stat block for the actions, abilities, the traits to use. If they've got stealth, making sure the stealth comes in. If they've got specialty movement stuff, how can I add that into combat? How can I make that useful in combat? Because anything that you're not using, your players are going to try to use all their player character abilities, so you should try to use all your monster abilities as well and traits. And you start looking at that. Look at synergy with other monsters. We talked about having the Hobgoblin Devastator, who's able to throw AoEs into their own fog cloud and not damage their own guys, and using the Bugbear's ability to grapple and move people into the fog cloud. And because they get advantage when they attack creatures they have grappled, that evens out the disadvantage they would have from the fog cloud, so it puts the PCs at a disadvantage. And that Devastator, who doesn't have to worry about entering their own ally when they throw fireballs and lightning bolts into the mix, and using those AoEs, they don't have to be very specific about the targeting they have. Doing that kind of stuff and having that built in, using that synergy with the other monsters. You want to make sure that you mix your monsters, try to get 2 to 3 different types of monsters per fight is generally kind of the sweet spot. Any more than that, and it becomes difficult to run. Even 3 can kind of be difficult to run if you have one like caster or something like that that's got a whole bunch of stuff going on in their stat block. But usually 2 to 3 is a pretty good sweet spot for that, to keep things interesting but not overloading, but you're also not only fighting the same kind of creature who can only do the one thing. And these are the different types, kind of templates that are from the 4th edition of D&D Dungeon Master's Guide. Great book. Go check it out. Go download it. It's well worth your money. It's a great resource for just running any kind of, specifically D&D, but any kind of TTRPG if you want the nuts and bolts of how to run games and how to be better dungeon master, game master, how to build encounters, how to build adventures, how to turn those adventures into campaigns, etc., etc. So in that, we have our battlefield control. That's basically having a caster, somebody who's able to control the battlefield, move things around, debuff the enemies. Adding their skirmishers, which are kind of just your basic mook enemies, guys who generally are pretty mobile. They don't want to drop in and just swap blows. They want to move around a lot. For this one, we had our Hobgoblin Devastator and our Bugbears, which we talked about. Our commander and troops, that's basically having a leader, somebody who's got something that buffs their allies, and having their mooks or their fodder, their troops. For this one, we had the Hobgoblin Captain that's got that big 30-foot emanation that gives all their allies advantage on attacks and saves while they're present and not incapacitated, which makes it very, very deadly. Sometimes you also want to, if you have some extra things, it's always nice to throw in a little bit of artillery too. Somebody who's hiding in the back. For this one, we did the Hobgoblin Captain with that big emanation. They've got the Bugbears, so they're going to be helpful for knocking people down in melee. And then 2 goblins we're just assigning as archers who just sit off to the side, not near each other, on opposite sides of the battlefield, behind some cover, and just take kind of pot shots, primarily at wizards and other lightly armored, low AC PCs who, especially useful if you have a good PC, a smart wizard who usually sits in the back and tries not to get into melee with things. So obviously, the sort of PC who kind of goes through multiple combats without getting hit oftentimes, because they're just kind of smart and they're like, look, I'm a sorcerer, I stand in the back, I'm not getting into the melee, I try to avoid that at all costs. Having 1 or 2 just low level archers that can plink at them can change the battlefield and make them have to do stuff that they don't usually have to do. We have our Dragon's Den, which is our solo attack. You want to add those layers and legendary actions and legendary resistances. Add that resistances, layer actions. That's hard to do in the middle of combat, as opposed to most solos are like the BBEG, like the big bad guy in the adventure. But you can also throw them in the middle of your adventures, but you probably don't want to use layer actions and stuff for that, so you have to mix it up a little bit. What we did here is we did the Ogre Battering Ram. It's also really hard. Solo monsters are hard to pull off by themselves because the action economy is really stacked against them. So what we did with this one is an Ogre Battering Ram that's just basically a big guy. He kind of hits hard, but more importantly, he's just got a bunch of hit points, so he'll take a bunch of damage through the rounds. And the PCs can focus on him, and then we have these goblin reinforcements that can kind of show up throughout. And then starting to add in some of that battlefield stuff. We'll talk more about this next time, but I did want to show a little bit of example about how to use the battlefield environment, create that to help boost up your battles. In this one, we had these rickety causeways that the Ogre Battering Ram does double damage to against structures and able to knock them down and push PCs off the causeways and force them to take falling damage and fall down into the water. The water restricts their movement because it's difficult terrain, but doesn't restrict the ogre's movement because he's large. All that good stuff. In the double line, we have our classic melee line and a ranged line. This one we did 4 bugbears and 3 goblin bosses. Those are our archers. The bugbear warriors have that ability. I'll put that here. Actually, we'll do the stalkers. The bugbears have this ability, and it's really great where they have the quick grab where they can use the bonus action to grapple somebody, and they have the trait where they can move people without using half movement. They can use their full movement and move people. So you can use these bugbear stalkers to keep PCs off of the goblin bosses who have multi-attacks, so they can make 2 arrow attacks, and they can sit in the back just behind cover, just blinking at PCs. And anytime a PC runs up to engage them, a bugbear can run up and grab them and move them back away. And now they have to break a grapple using their action and run back up. Bugbear just walks back over there, grabs them as part of the action, uses their attacks and hits them and moves them away. Rinse and repeat. They'll figure out really quickly. They got to figure out how to. Just running up to the goblin bosses as their archers will not be enough to take them out. They're gonna have to come up with some other kind of tactic, because that won't work, because the bugbears will keep moving them away. The wolf pack and the horde, that's just kind of throwing a whole bunch of enemies at that. This is a little bit more difficult to do in 5e because of the action economy and how important that is as far as building encounters, where you can just very easily, like we saw here, you could throw 60 goblins at a 4th level party, and by the numbers, that should be a difficult encounter, but not a deadly encounter. But I think we all know if you throw 60 goblins at a party, a 4th level party, those goblins are going to kill that party. That's probably what's going to happen. Especially if they're not all clumping together in AoE bursts. Especially a 4th level party because they don't have access to Fireball yet. So things are going to be very difficult for them. Other thing you can do is you can swarmify low CR monsters. Like we said, those standard goblins. Be like, oh, I'm going to take 30-something goblins and I'm going to just split them up into 4 like large-sized swarms. And the swarms will move around them. And so it's a different type of fight. And they have standard swarm mechanics where they have resistance to bludgeoning, slashing, and piercing. They can't regain hit points or gain temporary hit points. I might give them advantage. In fact, what I would do for creatures that I think more swarms should use in 5e2024 that we don't use is that instead of having them make attacks, instead it's like dexterity saves. And they always take half damage because I'm like, there's like 10 goblins in this swarm. Like, one of them's going to hit you. It's highly unlikely that I'm going to roll 10 d20s and I'm not going to hit you with one of them. No, even if your AC is 20. I'm probably going to hit you with at least one of them. I'm going to roll a 17 or higher on probably one of those dice. So instead of just making a dexterity save instead of an attack. And then if they maybe swarm over the creature's inside the swarm, maybe they have disadvantage on the dexterity saving throw. So you can always swarmify low CR monsters if you want it to feel like we're throwing a whole bunch of monsters at you. But you're like, I don't want to run 30 goblins because that's insane. And I don't want to do that. And nobody wants to, my players don't want to sit there at the table watching me roll 30 attacks. Sometimes maybe closer to 60 dice if they have advantage on all those attacks either. And you want to make sure that you start to do some synergy with the environment. We talked about that a little bit right here because we had the rickety stilts, causeway, and the waiting water thing. Readiness. That's another thing we looked at, talking about the players ambushing the monsters versus the monsters ambushing them. We talked about the gear. Where's their gear situation? A lot of these humanoid gears is one of the reasons we use goblinoids in this perspective. Is that if you catch the goblinoids unaware, there is a likelihood that they don't have their armor on. They might not have their weapons with them. They're busy doing something. They might be asleep. And then talking about battle start position, which is another slider or dial that you can tweak. Not every combat has to start with the party both sides within 30 feet of each other. You are unlimited. It is up to you as the dungeon master to determine how far away they are. You might decide this is, if they're outside, they start off 300 feet away from each other. And if we're doing the ones like we said earlier, where they have warg mounts, the goblins have warg mounts and they're charging down on them. Maybe they try to run, maybe they try to hide, maybe they try to meet them. If they have PCs that have longbows, they're easily within firing damage position with disadvantage. If they can start doing that, they can start taking pot shots as the monsters close, and vice versa. You can always have monsters that have really good, they have longbows themselves or something like that, and they can take cover behind trees and shoot. And then you've got to wait on the fighter and the rogue to hoof it over open ground for 300 feet. Trying to do dash actions, trying to get there, trying to take cover, and so these guys basically get free arrow shots at them before they can even get into a range in which they can actually engage the enemy. And then once they do, maybe they run away. That's what we talked about with morale. So deciding whether the monsters are going to fight till they're injured, or fight till they're like 3/4 HP, half HP, quarter HP, or until death. Very few creatures fight until death, the exceptions being like constructs or mindless undead that don't have any self-preservation aspect to it. And you can count either HP, either half HP or half the group is gone. So if you have 8 monsters and 4 of the monsters have been killed by the PCs, those last 4 start making checks, charisma saving throws to be like, are we going to stay in this fight, or are we going to flee, or are we going to run, are we going to retreat? And then sort of like what I do now is I do both. I keep track of both, but it'll be easier, especially if you're starting out with this mechanic, to just choose one or the other. Obviously, if you're fighting in a solo battle, it can only be your HP. It can't be the group. You're the only creature in it. And I use a roll under mechanic, so rather than use a charisma saving throw, I'll be like, I just roll a d20. If I roll their charisma score or lower, they're still in the fight. If they're not, If I roll higher than that, they look for a way to either retreat and or flee out of the combat. And you can choose how to flavor this. This is a matter of flavor based off of the monsters themselves and the circumstances. Basic goblinoids, pretty well known for being cowards, so they're just going to kind of flee back into the darkness. If you have something like hobgoblins that are very, very disciplined and structured, they're going to make a tactical retreat. And they're probably going to be trying to go get reinforcements to help them out. So then that changes the goals, which is what we're going to talk about next. So alternative goals, looking at that, where change the goals from just being to kill or be killed. Sometimes the monsters specifically want to capture somebody for information, or the the PCs need to capture a monster, because they want to know where the captives are, that the hostages are that they're trying to recover, or where the big bad's like throne room is, or whatever it is, trying to get a lay of the land, anything like that. So change that. Information's a very good one. That's gathering information very much. Same thing. Capture's also useful. It'll be like, well, obviously the hobgoblins are smart and they're disciplined, so they might want to capture the PCs and ransom them back, because these, rather than just kill them, so that way they can make money off the player characters or get items out of it that will bolster their strength for potentially a future encounter with them. You can also, sometimes the challenge is just getting through the room. We talked about having a causeway over a chasm, a big bridge over a chasm with these sort of like nacelles along the side walls that the player characters can't get to because there's a chasm in between them, and there's just goblins taking pot shots at them. It's like obviously this encounter's not about killing the individual goblins. Again, we know, looking at the encounter map, that I can throw dozens of goblins at a level 4 party. They'll never be able to kill them all, and just reinforcing the player characters. That is not the goal here. Your goal is to get through the room and then making the bridge like 90 feet long. So it's like they will have to end their turn probably, unless they come up with a very clever way in the middle of this causeway where they'll all get attacked. It'll take at least one round to get shot through arrows with just standing out in the open. And then, maybe they use illusions, maybe they use haste, maybe they have a jump spell or a fly spell or something else. Maybe they have spider climb, so maybe they go over and attack some of the goblins, or use that way so if they can run along the walls and they only have to take attacks from half of the goblins instead of all of the goblins. All sorts of crazy stuff. They can turn themselves invisible and run across it, and makes it unlikely they're going to get hit. All sorts of fun stuff they could do, so it becomes a challenge for them to get through. And again, we talked about that, arguably whether that is then a combat or non-combat encounter at that point. I'll leave it up to you to decide. I think it's still a combat encounter. If you have creatures who are actively attacking you, that feels like a combat encounter to me. And you can attack them back. And then we got down to stealing gear, supplies from MacGuffins. That's a great thing you can do with your monsters, is the monsters give them an alternative goal, so you're not necessarily put you in a situation where the player characters can win the encounter. They killed more goblins than the goblins didn't kill any of them. They might not have even injured them at all, because the goblins were more focused on stealing their stuff. This is a great one to use if you're having like an overnight camp and random encounter. Be like, bandits sneak into your camp, and they're bandits. It's in the name. They're there to steal things. They're not necessarily there. They're not cutthroats. They're not there to cut your throat. They're there to steal your stuff. And so they're trying to take your gear, your supplies, your weapons, your armor, because you're not going to be wearing it while you're asleep. They're going to take your food. That becomes a big issue for low-level parties. If somebody steals all your food, and bandits who are living in the woods probably want food. And then if you don't have somebody who's got like the old Outlander background, like now you've got a forage, that kind of puts another wrinkle in the adventure for them. And then, right, they're chasing people. If they decide to chase bandits off into the night, away from camp, are there other bandits that maybe come in and take stuff from the camp when they're unattended? Can they not chase down those people because they're worried about if they leave camp, more people will just come take more of their stuff? So that becomes, once you want to provide in areas where their players have to make thoughtful choices about what they're going to do, which means that you have to give them situations in which they understand what's going on. And protecting the escortee, a simple escort quest is that you've got the hostage, they're trying to take the hostage back, or your escort, they're trying to take the escort back. Very simple. And that's it. That's pretty much all we talked about. Like I said, next time we're going to do more of the battlefield environment stuff. I thought we were going to get to it this time, but this was a lot longer than I thought it was going to be, which is almost always the case. But that's it for me. If you guys like this, share the video, like it, etc., subscribe, do all the fun stuff. Until then, we'll probably do this next week. We'll figure this out. We'll do the part 2. We'll knock out the battlefield environment stuff. But that's going to be it for me on this one. Thanks for hanging out, guys. Always fun. I'll check you next time. All right? Bye-bye.